Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday, almost to the weekend. Brian and I are back with another Notre Dame football rundown, and we have a lot of different topics that we're going to discuss today. We're getting the show kicked off talking about the All-America candidates on Notre Dame's roster, and we're splitting this up into two conversations, really. Part one of today's show is going to be about the offense. Part two is going to be about the defense. We flirted around with the idea of maybe we combine it all into one, but good problem to have is there's a lot of candidates to discuss. So we're breaking it into two parts. And then we're also going to preview Notre Dame's seventh regular season opponent today, the BYU Cougars, one of the more anticipated matchups of the 2026 season. And we're going to take everything home talking about the top 10 offensive lines in college football and a daily mailbag geared towards the topics that we discussed today. So get those questions in throughout the show. MB for mailbag, mailbox emoji. It lets us know to set those questions aside. But Brian, loaded slate today, man. I'm excited for it.
Very much so. You know, we were kind of back and forth on several topics, but we were going to do like Heisman Trophy, and we're like, I don't know if we're going to have enough time because, like Trev said, I think this All-American conversation is going to go a little bit longer, and so we're going to break it into two. But yeah, fun rundown. This is more of our midweek rundown, but I didn't call it midweek rundown because it's not the middle of the week, and so it's just our rundown show, and we're going to just kind of cover some topics a little bit more. I don't say rapid fire for us. It'd be rapid fire for us, so. Yeah, it's going to be fun, especially the offensive line conversation, Trev, because that was really back and forth. There's so much projection that goes into that. Very much looking forward to that conversation. And I want to hear from y'all. I want y'all to be giving us some of your top 10 offensive line groups this year because it was a challenge for us. And there's some offensive lines that I think could be pretty good that we left out. And there's some offensive lines that are very talented but haven't proven yet. There's a lot. There's a lot. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. And then even Notre Dame's placement was a challenge. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation, Trev, but we're going to do that at the end of the show. We're going to kick things off talking All-Americans.
Like we talked about, there's several candidates that we can talk about on both sides of the ball. And where we're going to start, you're listening to two offensive guys. We're going to start on the offensive side of the ball for Notre Dame. And there's a bunch of different candidates. We're going to break this down into, freshman All-Americans, sleeper candidates, but Brian, at the end of the day, when you start looking at who is a prime candidate to be named an All-American on Notre Dame's offense, it's quarterback C.J. Carr, returning starter from last year, first returning starter since 2020, and a preseason favorite on FanDuel to win the Heisman Trophy.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things about being an All-American, and just to answer a question that we got in the chat, when we're talking about All-Americans, we're talking about guys that we think are going to be All-American candidates on the All-American list, not ours. This is sort of a predicting who we think could be the postseason All-Americans. At for Walter, it's the five, right? It's the five big ones. It's Walter Camp, it's Football Writers, it's AFCA, it's AP, and it's Sporting News, right? It's kind of those groups, and then there's some others who's All-American teams that I kind of have a little bit of respect for. I don't mean that sounded like really disrespectful, but that I also look at and put something to that aren't part of that five, but. So that's what we're referring to. We're talking about like actual national Americans, not IB All-Americans. And so when you talk about C.J. Carr, Trev, it's interesting because the reason that I don't think we saw as much preseason All-America love for him in the magazines is because of how deep it is at quarterback this year. And I was still a little bit surprised. And some of it you understand. It's the Manning hype combined with the Texas hype is why you're seeing a lot of love for Arch. And I'm not saying that love is unwarranted. We think Arch has got a chance to have a very good year, but I don't know that what Arch did last year should have him as this first team All-American with so many people. Same thing with Dante Moore. I think they both showed things that have them in the conversation, but so did CJ. And, so did several other quarterbacks. Julian Sand I rarely see him as a first-team preseason All-American, and he was a Heisman finalist last year, you know what I mean? So that's part of what makes the challenge for C.J. Carr when it comes to being All-American. Not that he cares. I mean, he's going to go out there and ball out and let the chips fall where they may, but that's the challenge for him is it is a deep year at quarterback. And if he can have a great year where in other years he's a first or second-team All-American where he's third or not even third, because of how deep of a year it is. But I think he's clearly the guy that we view as having the best opportunity because I think he is going to rise above some of those quarterbacks. Number one, just in his overall play. Number two, I think his production is going to be much improved. And number three, I think a big part of this conversation, Trevor, is I think Notre Dame is going to be a very dominant football team this year, and that's going to factor into it as well, where, CJ loses his first 2 games as a starter last year, and I think there was always kind of that there was nothing he could do the rest of the year that was going to kind of overcome that he didn't destroy Miami and Texas A&M, although I would argue he played pretty well in those 2 games considering a lot of different factors. But so now he comes out and he's going to have a chance early in the year to kind of beat up on some teams early. But the other thing is the marquee games aren't week 1 and 2 now, or week 1 and 3 like games 1 and 2 last year because they had a bye. Now the marquee games are like mid-October, early November, late November, and I think that helps CJ as well, where if Julian Sain plays this great game at the end of the year against Michigan, or Arch Manning has this great game at the end of the year against Texas A&M, you're like, okay, well, it's a week after CJ just went out and ripped up SMU, and only 3 weeks after he went out and did what he did against Miami. And so I think those things help as well, of why when I look at CJ Carr, I think he's a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate, Trev. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, CJ is poised for a very, very strong season in South Bend. But to your point, as are a lot of other quarterbacks, there's a world, and it wouldn't shock me if there's not a single consensus All-American, first-team consensus All-American at quarterback this year. I could see 2 of the outlets going with CJ. One goes with Arch. One goes with Julian Sain. Another one goes with Dante Moore. And so I think the quarterback battles this year are going to be very fascinating to follow. But I'm with you. CJ Carr is in a spot where he's a lot of people where he's getting a lot of recognition, rightfully so. Is a lot of people believe that he has one of the best. Notre Dame has one of the best offensive coordinator quarterback duos in the country, and that's a huge factor.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's a great point, Trev, because there is an OC that has an experience developing elite offenses and quarterbacks that can be Heisman candidates. We saw that obviously 3 years ago, his quarterback won the Heisman Trophy and won it kind of running away. I mean, by the time we got to the end of the year, it was kind of a no-brainer that Jaden Daniels deserved the Heisman Trophy. So that factors in and just the production that we've seen from this offense the last couple of years. And when you look at it, Trev, it's like, okay, what does CJ Carr need to do to win All-American honors? I think part of it, there's a little bit of Heisman Trophy-ishness to the conversation this year, because I do think if CJ's putting up numbers and Arch is putting up numbers and Julian's putting up numbers and Drew Mestemaker's putting up numbers and Darian Mentz is putting up numbers and Byron Brown is putting up numbers, and we go down a long list of all the really good quarterbacks that are coming out this year, what could separate? It could be how good your team is. And so, like, the numbers don't necessarily, like, I don't know that anyone's going to have, like, just these crazy numbers for a blue blood. Maybe Drew Mestemaker puts up crazy numbers, but like maybe Darian Mensah repeats the high level of numbers he had last year. Maybe it's a more efficient version of what he did last year. It's possible. We saw that from the Shannon Dawson offense 2 years ago with Cam Ward. But when everybody's putting up really good numbers, one of the separators could be, 1, what was your team's record? And 2, I think the biggest thing for CJ beyond just pure numbers, he's got to play well in the big games. It's going to be real hard, and he's going to get a chance to duel against some other well-known quarterbacks that's going to help him in this conversation as well.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest piece, is how well does he perform on October 17th, November 7th, and November 21st. Mm-hmm. We've seen Notre Dame quarterbacks come through South Bend before. Sam Hartman rings a bell. He was off to a phenomenal start for his Notre Dame career. Put up big numbers against Navy, 4 touchdowns in the season opener, which tied, I think, Jack Cohn and I think Tommy Reese for like the most passing touchdowns in a season opener at Notre Dame. And he goes on to do what he did against Central Michigan and NC State. And then in the bigger moments against Ohio State, against Clemson, against Louisville, he had the big run against Duke. But in that span of 4 games, that was probably his best play, so.
And even USC, he wasn't the reason they were dominating USC. They were running on USC. The defense was lighting them up. They were working on short field. Not that he didn't play well. He made some big throws. I mean, I think the post brought to Chris Tyree, but he just wasn't asked to do a lot because of, again, short fields, defensive touchdowns, dominating on defense, kick return for a score. So, yeah, you're right. He didn't do it in the biggest moments. And the Duke game was a little bit of an anomaly because he just was getting his face beat in the whole game. Yeah. And I would even say to a degree Louisville as well, because he had that ball that Chris Tyree dropped in the end zone. You have the big play downfield to Sam Hart to Michael Mitchell Evans that got called back from a penalty. Like, he actually did some good things against Louisville. It's just his team didn't help him out a whole lot in that game either. But the point is he did not shine in those big moments. And that's something that we're going to need to see. And honestly, that's been an issue for quarterbacks for a while in the regular season. You think back to how good Jack Cohn was in 2021. What was the game he probably struggled the most? It was Cincinnati. You think of Ian Book in 2019 and in 2020 when he had some big moments, but he did pretty well against Clemson the first game statistically, although he really struggled in the third quarter, early fourth quarter, which helped Clemson get back in that game. You think of the fumble that he had. And then, of course, he didn't play very well in the ACC title game, 2019. He was not very good against Georgia. He was terrible against Michigan. Those were only really two big games that they played. And so this has been an issue for Notre Dame quarterbacks in the regular season for a while. I think Riley Leonard played about as well as we've seen a Notre Dame quarterback playing a big moment when you think of the Texas A&M game, to kick that season off. And he wasn't even great in that game. He was good, but he wasn't lights out. It's been a long time since we've seen a Notre Dame quarterback go into a big game and really just light the world on fire, where you can't like put an asterisk by it. Like, yeah, Clemson was also missing 3 starters on that defense because of, the COVID stuff in 2020. And that doesn't take away from the job Ian did, but it's just like, it doesn't have the same impact. Or you can look at it this way. Who cares about injuries? Everybody has injuries, but look what, okay, fine. I accept that. And Ian was clutch in that game, but then there was the rematch in the ACC title game where he got chewed up. So it'd be nice to see a Notre Dame quarterback really step into a spotlight game and say, "Hey, I'm gonna play my tail off," and CJ's gonna have to do that if he wants to have a chance. Yes, numbers matter, team success matters, but I think that's the final piece for CJ Carr if you want to be an All-American this year, is in those big moments, especially against Miami, because there's gonna be a lot of eyeballs on that game, and I think there's gonna be a lot of eyeballs in the BYU game as well. You got a chance, but I think the quarterback duels in the second half of the year are also going to be something that to keep an eye on with CJ. Is he's going to have a chance to go against 3 guys that some people are going to view as top 10 caliber quarterbacks, and he's going to have to outplay him.
Another player on this list that's pretty close to the top is Anthony Knapp, a player who made the transition from left tackle last year, 27 career starts, 2-year starter at left tackle for the Irish, is now at left guard. And we've talked about him ad nauseum this offseason, just around his move and how we believe that it's a strategic move to move him to the inside. He projects more to the inside. We also believe that this gives him the opportunity to elevate his game to where he can enter that All-American conversation. Anthony Knapp is a player that I'm very curious to see how his season starts to pan out, because we are working with, I don't want to necessarily say like the assumption, but like the evaluation that his skill set and his physical tools project more to the inside. But there's a world, which, not predicting it, what if he's just the same as he was at left tackle at left guard? Based on the things that we saw in the spring, I don't believe that to be true, which is why he is a candidate to be an All-America mention in this one.
This is a really interesting one, Trevor, because you and I are really fired up about Anthony Knapp moving inside, and maybe we're right, maybe we aren't right, but this is one that I'm confident that I'm going to be right about, not because of I'm such a smart guy, but we've seen it to a degree. I mean, we watched him go toe to toe with Francis Brew and Tion Gray, and for a little bit Jason Onye before he got hurt in the spring. You're like, yep, it's pretty natural for him, and we've seen him play well in big moments. You think about, you could make a case that the best game that Anthony Knapp played in his career was a playoff game. Maybe 2 of the best games he's played in his career were playoff games. And when you think, obviously, the Indiana game, and he's a guy that's got a chance to be an impact player. And so now he goes into year 3. He's going to be a junior. He's going to be a year older, a year stronger, a year more natural. He's going to have potentially better talent around him than we've seen in a while. He's taken on more of a leadership role with this offensive line. Like, I think he's a guy that has an opportunity to be that kind of player. And he's another one that's going to have to play well in some big moments. If you're going to beat Miami, you're going to have to handle those D tackles. You're going to struggle to run the football in Miami if you can't handle Moten and Justin Scott and the kid they got from Wisconsin. And there's was it Keanu Davis, right? I think is his name. You're going to have to handle those guys, and he's going to be a big part of that, of that success. And so when I look at Anthony Knapp, if this offensive line is as good as we think it's going to be, I think he's one of the guys that people are going to look at and be like, hey, that's maybe their best guy on this really good offensive line. And if Anthony Knapp's an All-American caliber player, I think, you're going to see an offensive line that's playing at a high level and in the Joe Moore conversation. And so I think he is the most obvious choice. He's the most experienced offensive lineman on the roster coming back. He's not the oldest, but he's played the most. Ashton Craig obviously has been here a long time, and Ashton Craig has started in 3 different seasons, but he's just never been able to put it all together. So I think Anthony Knapp is certainly a guy that has that ability to play well in big games. The other thing too, Trev, I just don't. There's a lot of good guards in college football this right now. There aren't a lot of great guards coming back in college football right now, and I think that's something that helps Anthony Knapp as well. Is that he's a pretty good player already, whose game I think is going to benefit from moving inside. I think he's going to be a really strong run blocker. He as a pass blocker, he was a solid pass blocker last year. I know people like to talk about he only gave up X number of pressures and sacks, and those aren't end-all be-all numbers. He gave up 3 pressures in the 2 biggest games of the year. It's also about a guy that it's one thing to kind of do your job, and he did. He didn't give up a lot of pressures last year, but he wasn't a dominant pass blocker. He just kind of did his job for the most part. As a guard, I think he can be a dominant pass blocker because he moves as well, if not better, than Billy Schrauth. He's longer than Billy. He's more naturally powerful than Billy. And I think he's going to thrive playing in tighter quarters like Billy did. And so I don't think they're going to miss a beat at left guard. And that's why Billy Schrauth earned, what was it, AP, second-team All-America honors, or was it AFCA, second-team All-America honors, despite playing 7 games. You know what I mean? Because when he played, he was outstanding in pass pro. And I think Anthony Knapp can be every bit as good as Billy Schrauth in pass pro, but I think Anthony's going to be a better run blocker. And that's why I'm excited. And that's saying a lot because, I was very high on Billy Schrauth when he was healthy. Yeah. I just think Knapp's a guy that's got a chance to be that kind of player. And now that he's at a more natural, not naturally he's ever played it, but like his skill set is more built for this, I think he's going to blow up. And the fact that there aren't any, I'm looking at some of the top guards in the country. They're like from Iowa and Cincinnati and in places like that. And they're good football players. There's no doubt about it. But it's not like there's this lockdown, like no brainer. These guys are going to be All-Americans. Like there is a defensive end. Okay, you kind of feel like Colin Simmons and Clev Lubin and Dylan Stewart. And there's like this group of ends that are already like dominant players. And if you want to be an All-American end, you're going to have to play better than those guys. I think it's a little easier to accomplish a guard than it is like defensive end and quarterback. So I think that combined with how good I expect Anthony Knapp to be is why I think, and it's not to discredit his All-American honor. It's more of like there's more room for him to prove that he's one of the best guards. This is as opposed to a year where there's already this assumption and then it's hard for people to break their assumptions. That's kind of what I mean by that. There's just more of an opportunity for him to show, hey, I am one of those guys and not to get overlooked. Like you can get overlooked in a year where there's just already these established players at positions.
Yeah, the journey for Anthony Knapp to becoming an All-American is twofold for me. One, it's about the top-level competition that you played. You brought up a very good point about how the level of guard play returning in the country is not that great. Notre Dame's going to face a couple of them. Some of the better interior linemen in the country are on Notre Dame's regular season schedule. Against Miami, they're facing Ryan Rodriguez and Matthew McCoy. They have the guard from SMU. They have Bruce Mitchell and both guards from BYU. So there's going to be an indirect matchup for Anthony Knapp where there's going to be writers that vote on All-American teams like, hey, we thought Matthew McCoy is one of the better guards in that country, but we could just not stop watching what Anthony Knapp was doing at left guard for Notre Dame. Yeah, the other piece and the other journey for Anthony Knapp is you got to be able to put together a complete season. That's the thing. As a true freshman in 2024, you're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt where it's like, okay, he's a true freshman. First start was on the road against Texas A&M in College Station.
He handled himself well in that game.
And he did. Yeah. But then you fast forward to 2025. And it's like, okay, he started out sluggish. His 2 worst performances were against the 2 best teams that he played. But then as the season started to go on, found his footing again at the same position. With the layout of Notre Dame's schedule, it can't be like he was fine against Wisconsin, let up some plays. If he wants to put together an All-American caliber season, it's being extremely dominant from September 6th to October 17th, and then really coming to your own down the stretch. That'll be huge for you.
Yeah, big time. Hey, Trev, I would say that there's another All-American candidate that I think could end up becoming one of those breakout players. His path is a little bit harder because there are more established names. And, of course, we're talking about right tackle Gerby Lambert.
He's a player that will start to garnish a lot of, and I'm honestly astonished that he hasn't yet to this point. If there was a 6'7", 330-pound offensive tackle that was getting ready to start down in Tuscaloosa, oh wait, they had that last year in Caden Proctor, garnish a lot of offseason attention. I'm shocked after being named a freshman All-American, Gerby's getting not a lot of offseason love, but he's somebody that just by namesake and by what his physical traits are that he brings to the table, I think he's going to be an All-American candidate in the eyes of a lot of media before they even start watching him play on the field. But he, like Anthony Knapp, is moving back out to a position or moving into a position that I think he more naturally projects to. He was a good right guard, and I think if he stayed at right guard for the duration of his collegiate career, he would have been a really good player. I think a tackle he can be
elite.
Yeah, exactly. But you move him out to offensive tackle. I think whether you keep him at guard or tackle, he was going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. I think at guard, he could have been a top 15 NFL draft pick. I think a tackle, we could be talking about a top 10, potentially top 5 NFL draft pick when his season's said and done. One way to get that started is to be named an All-American this year.
I'm with you. I'm a little surprised we aren't seeing more preseason All-America love for Gerby and Lambert. I mean, even Phil Steele comes out with his 4 teams, and the only Notre Dame offensive lineman on there was Charles Jagasol, which is like, what are we doing here? But Anthony Knapp's getting more love. I mean, there was one outlet that had him as like the number 4 guard in the country. I think he was a preseason first-team All-American. I think on one of, was it Walter Camp that had him as a first or second team? Was he second team? First or second team. And then Athlon had him as a preseason second-team All-American as well. So there's at least a little bit of buzz with Anthony Knapp. None with Gerby Lambert. I don't think that Lindy's had him in the top 10 to 12 tackles coming back in college football this year, which to a degree I understand. I mean, he's moving from guard to tackle and all that, but do some homework. The guy was a 5-star offensive lineman, played some tackle last year. We've joked before. We joke about it, but it's a serious observation. The best pass that we saw from a left tackle last year was the one snap we saw Gerby Lambert playing left tackle against Purdue.
Yep.
When Anthony Knapp got knocked out. He's long, he's nimble, he's powerful. He was obviously a guy, and I think the stuff we saw from him with some of the footwork inconsistency, that was about him moving from a position he was comfortable to one he wasn't comfortable with. And remember, they didn't move him until camp had started and was already a week or so old before they even moved him to guard permanently. And so he was going through some of those growing pains, but you boot him out to tackle. That's why I expect the jump to be more than just typical year 1 to year 2 start potential. I think it's going to be more than that, because I think it's not only does he now have experience under his belt, he's now playing a position he'll be more comfortable. And we saw it early in spring practice. Him and Sullivan Absher already have a really good rapport together. Which is weird because they were battling for the same position last year.
Yeah.
But first day of practice, they're passing off stunts. And I'm like, dude, what have these guys just been hip to hip all winter? Like working on this stuff? It looked really natural. And when you talk to people inside the program and you start talking about offensive linemen and stuff, and whoever you bring up, whenever I bring up anyone else, they'll answer the question, then immediately shift the conversation to Gerby. and that's when okay, there's some excitement about this kid. But the tools are there, Trev. He's not some kid you never heard of or hope he's a 5-star recruit for a reason. He's a massive young man, and I think he has a chance to develop it to be one of the best tackles. I understand some of the hesitation that we see about, I just need to see him do it at tackle. I'm not worried about that because, we have seen him do it at tackle, not just in about 20 or so snaps last year, but we've seen him in 2 jersey scrimmages playing tackle. We've seen him in 2 blue gold games playing tackle, and we've seen him in more practice. We've seen more practices of him playing tackle than guard, because even early in fall camp, first couple practices we went to, he was playing tackle, and he played tackle his whole freshman year. So that spring and going into the 25 season, he was playing tackle. So I think Gerby's got a chance to be a stud this year. And everything we said about Anthony Knapp about how do you earn that honor is the same. You said dominate early, be great in the big games. Shut down Damon Wilson and Marquise Lightfoot and Armando Blunt in the Miami game. That's what you need to do. Play well in that game. You've got a shot to now open some eyes.
Well, and the benefit, too, is Gerby Lambert's going to get tested even before the Miami and BYU game. I mean, against North Carolina, he's going against Abu Jade, the guy that had over 45 pressures last year. He'll get the opportunity to go against Tavara Tafiti at Stanford. So I'm with you. One of the things I love about Gerby is he plays with that natural disposition that a lot of the recruits that Notre Dame is bringing in the 27 cycle naturally play with. Gerby Lambert was one of the few offensive linemen last year that I think just naturally went to go look for work after he got done polishing off another block. So very excited to see what he does this year, Brian. I'm with you. I'm with you completely. But yeah, there's three candidates up at the top. We talked about CJ Carr, Anthony Knapp, and Gerby Lambert. But yeah, as you know, there's several players that work their way up into contention as the season goes along. And those are players somewhat like in our sleeper category. And where we're going to start with this one, Brian, is the guy taking over for Jeremiah Love, who was a unanimous All-American last year, and that's Aeneas Williams, the guy seemingly stepping into the number one running back role.
That's going to be a big part of him having a chance to be the number one role. And I think that's one thing that kind of keeps us from maybe talking more about him as an All-American candidate is because we don't know that he's going to be like the guy. He could be every bit as good as we think he's going to be and still split time with some really other talented players. But I do think Aeneas kind of seizes hold of that position. I think with, you've got some really good backs coming back. Kewan Lacey's a guy that gets a lot of attention. He's going to produce again this year, most likely. You've got, the kid from Missouri coming back now. Obviously, I'm not sure where things are with him, with the shooting that happened this year, but it's Ahmad Hardy I'm talking about. But even with those guys, if they're both healthy, there's a lot of good backs in college football this year that are vying for that sort of that spot. Bo Jackson, obviously, Texas landed a couple kids. If Raleek Brown does at Texas what he did at Arizona State, just same thing. He's going to get a lot more attention because he's at Texas instead of Arizona State. And that's just kind of how it goes. There's a lot of good backs in college football this year, but I think there's an opportunity for Aeneas again if he can produce and have 1,000-yard season and catch 30-some balls that you might see him sneak into that some of that conversation. It's going to be the reason he's more of a sleeper is because I don't know that Notre Dame's going to run the ball quite as much with him as they did as we saw last year. But maybe they don't run as much, but he gets a greater bulk of the carries than maybe what Jeremiah did last year. I mean, we'll see how that goes. But there's a lot of good running backs. The ability to go up there is going to be tough. But I do think that because Notre Dame is developing the reputation they are at running back, that there's almost kind of like a doubt about Aeneas. Well, he won't be as good as Jeremiah. But then let him go out there and start producing like him. Running for 100 yards a game, catching 3-4 balls a game, and wow, this kid's averaging 6.5, 7 yards a carry, just like Jeremiah did. Not that he's as good, but you know what I mean. Now, all of a sudden, people start paying attention to him. Then you get to November, and he's got those spotlight game opportunities where, hey, man. Maybe we should be talking about Aeneas Williams more.
Yeah, the fascinating thing about All-American conversations is you have to also factor in who else is in contention. And to be a first-team All-American, there's one running back spot. Sometimes two. Is it one or two running back spots, give or take, I would say?
Usually two, but sometimes they'll create an all-purpose one that they'll put a guy that caught a lot of throws. So he could maybe fall into that one as well. But usually it's some are two, some are one. It just depends on which All-American team we're talking about.
That's what's interesting about this is there's a world where Aeneas Williams rushes for 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. Hey, that was an All-American caliber performance. But Kewan Lacey might rush for 1,300 yards and 18 touchdowns in the regular season. So we just don't know. But I'm with you. He absolutely could be in contention. And like Justin N.D. Sniper and like what Brian mentioned, it's his receiving out of the backfield could play a major factor. Ahmed Hardy's not a factor in the pass game, like Aeneas Williams will be coming out of Missouri. So
at least how we think he's going to be. Yeah, I agree. There's some others, Trev. Ashton Craig is another one that I think if he can be healthy, if he can play a whole season, could potentially jump into that because I feel the same way about center that I do guard. I don't know that there's a lot of surefire, this guy's going to be an All-American at guard type of player this year. He's an opportunity. And look, another one, Trev, is receiver. I think, am I predicting it? No. But there's a world in which a Jordan Faison or a Jaden Greathouse or a Mylan Graham or a Quincy Porter, maybe even a Cam Williams just kind of has this breakout season and, has 1,000-yard season that all of a sudden they are going to get more love because we haven't seen Notre Dame have a receiver like that in a while. It's almost kind of like when a guy outperforms what that school typically does, maybe that shine on him is a little bit brighter because whoa, Notre Dame has a receiver that's out there balling. So I think that's an opportunity there. And again, with that receiver, let's just say it's Jordan Faison since he's the leading receiver from last year. Let's say Jordan Faison goes into November with 600 yards receiving, 500 yards receiving. He's doing well, but he's not lighting the world on fire. But he's starting to get some attention because he's CJ's number one guy. Then we go to November 7th, and Malachi Toney's on the field, Cooper Barcotti's on the field, and then all of a sudden it's Jordan Faison that goes for 7 catches and 115 yards, and Malachi and Cooper play well, but not as well as what Jordan does. And all of a sudden, coming out of that November 7 game, like, hey, man, maybe we need to be looking more at this Jordan Faison kid, because look at the numbers he put up and look what he did against Miami's big-time secondary. Like, there's opportunities there. I'm not predicting it. I'd be a little surprised if it happened. But I think there's too much talent at receiver. And if we're talking about CJ Carr is going to be a Heisman candidate, I can't sit there and just say, like, there's not at least an opportunity for a receiver to become the guy. We think the ball is going to get spread around a lot, but there's certainly going to be an opportunity for a guy to step up and produce enough to where he's going to get some of that All-America talk.
100 yards this season. That's not because I think 10 different pass catchers are going to have 350 yards. I think somebody's bound to break out. Jordan Faison's in that conversation. Jaden Greathouse is in that conversation, as is Mylan Graham, who I think garnished a lot of offseason attention coming over from Ohio State. J.D. Pickell talked about how, whether we agree or disagree with the take.
Oh, the pickle.
That one of his favorite wide receiver quarterback duos in college football is CJ Carr and Mylan Graham. Having said that, if that comes to fruition and they become a really dynamic 1-2 punch at quarterback and pass catcher, he could be in contention as well.
I'm not sleeping on Quincy Porter just yet either for that.
Yeah.
I'm not. Trev, let's talk about, just as we wrap this up, what's interesting about the offense is the defense is, when we get to that, is a lot of All-America candidates, not more so than the offense, way more, and some sleeper candidates. Not a lot of freshman All-America candidates. I do think there's more freshman All-America candidates this year. I'm not sure how it's going to be with the rule changes. I think they're still going to have, I would assume, redshirt freshmen be eligible this year, because there are redshirt freshmen still, whereas next year there won't be redshirt freshmen since the 5-for-5 rules being passed. I would assume so. I think freshman All-Americans should actually be freshmen, not freshman eligibility, but that I don't make the rules. So I think there's several players that have an opportunity, including some true freshmen. But when you talk about potential freshman All-Americans this year, Trev, it's got to start with Will Black.
Yeah, he's stepping into the starting lineup. The only redshirt freshman, I believe, barring Quincy Porter winning the boundary receiver job, will be the only redshirt freshman in Notre Dame starting lineup. Mm-hmm. His skill set projects very well to this next level. We wanted to see him at left tackle last year, not in replace of Anthony Knapp. I simply just mean not taking snaps at left guard,
right,
and playing left tackle. Very excited to see what he can do this year. He's absolutely in contention.
I'm actually, of all the All-Americans we've talked about, he'd be the most surprising if he doesn't get it, because we are talking about freshman All-American, not national All-American. I'd be pretty surprised. Look, if there's an injury up front early in the season, or if he beats somebody out, Matty Augustine's another guy who's in the same class as Will Black, who could maybe sneak into some freshman All-American honors. Look, Joe Alt didn't step in the starting lineup till game 6 of his freshman year, and he became a freshman All-American. We could maybe see Matty being a guy that if the opportunity presents itself, either he outplays somebody or there's an injury, which, as we talked about the other day, has happened every year going all the way back to 2019 for Notre Dame. He's a guy that I could see potentially also getting some of that love. And, I think you talk about redshirt freshmen. Those are the 2 redshirt freshmen that have the best chance. Maybe like a James Flanagan, if he becomes like the guy at tight end. I don't know that his game is going to necessarily be that. There's some other guys you can maybe look at, but I think those are the most obvious, the redshirt freshmen. There are some true freshmen, however, that have this opportunity. I think the most obvious is Ian Premer, tight end. I think he is the true freshman on either side of the ball that has the best opportunity to come in as a true freshman and have the kind of statistical impact that could lead to him being a freshman All-American.
Yeah, he's walking into a room that's as wide open. We'll talk about the candidates for defensive freshman All-Americans, but in comparison to what Rodney Dunham and Joey O'Brien are walking into, the room that Ian Bremer's walking into is more open than what some of the other ones are. He has an opportunity to be the number 2 guy. Potentially how fall camp goes and as the season plays out, he could be the number 1 guy. We just don't know the answers to those questions, but I'm with you. He is absolutely in contention and the top of the list for me as far as the 26 class is concerned.
Yeah, like even if he's not the number 1 Cooper Flanagan is the starter, but Ian's the starting pass catcher. When they go 12 personnel, he's the guy that's catching the throws, which is kind of how it was in 2020. where Michael Mayer wasn't like the guy at tight end. Now Tommy Trumbull played a ton. Brock Wright played a lot. They were blockers. And then all of a sudden you have, Michael Mayer getting those opportunities as a pass catcher. So I could certainly see something like that. I'd actually be Will Black and Ian Premer are the two guys that I'd be actually a little bit surprised if they're not in the conversation for freshman All-American. Not that they'll necessarily get it, but at least in the conversation for freshman All-American. The running back's another one where if there's injuries this year, I could see Javion or Jonas Walton, whoever's kind of in the best position to kind of force their way into the rotation. Trev, I could certainly see that. They're not guys that I'm predicting because I don't think the opportunity is going to be there for them to produce enough as freshmen. I think they're both going to play and impress us this year, even if it's just backup moments. Like, dude, those guys they brought in at the end of the game were actually more impressive than the guys that we saw at the beginning of the game. Like, it wouldn't shock me if we have that. Will they produce enough? I think that's going to probably require an injury this year for that, but they're in the conversation. And then the last one on offense, Trev, for me is Bubba Frazier, but not necessarily as a receiver, more so as a return man. If he can lock down, starting kick return or starting punt return opportunity this year as a true freshman, he's a guy that could also be in the conversation for freshman All-American as well. There's a lot of talented players that could be in this conversation for Notre Dame, and he's another one of them.
Let's switch gears, have the same conversation, but on the defensive side of the ball here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're talking about All-America candidates, and we just got done talking about guys like CJ Carr and Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert. Where the defense differs is there's a lot of players on defense that are a little bit closer to closing that gap to winning All-American honors than on the offensive side of the ball. A little bit projection is needed. On defense, not so much. Some of it's like you're playing the same position, elevate a little bit, but there's a world where the defense is home to several, and it's not a stretch. Not that the offense is, but multiple All-American candidates on Notre Dame's defense would not shock me literally in the slightest this year.
Well, I mean, everyone on offense requires some projection. Everyone. There's at least one guy on defense that it's like there's no projection involved. It's like, dude, you just do what you did last year because he's a returning consensus unanimous All-American, and that's Leonard Moore. This is one of the most obvious preseason All-America rankings that Notre Dame has had. I think the only other one that I could think of in recent years that's been quite like that is you'd have to DBs. You'd go maybe Xavier Watts going into 2024, and then Kyle Hamilton going into 2021. I think are the last two times we've seen a Notre Dame player since the 2020 started it was like this much of a no-brainer All-American going into the season, in my opinion. And so he certainly, we won't spend a lot of time on Leonard Moore. It's really just about stay healthy and keep doing what you're doing. That's really it. If he just repeats last year, he's an All-American. Now, do I think Leonard Moore can be even better than he was last year? Yes. But they just don't need him to. Like, if he is better, great. But it's just kind of like, just don't regress and stay healthy. That's really all I need to see from Leonard Moore. I will not turn down him getting better. I'm simply saying it's not like they need him to be better or he's not going to play at an All-American level. If he just does what he did last year, Trev, he's already an All-American. Anything beyond that's like, whoo, boy, gravy. Now we're talking about him being one of the best corners ever at Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like that's what he could be. And, that's what Todd Light did. As good as Todd Light was in 1988 as a sophomore, he's even better in 1989 as a junior. And that's the category that Leonard Moore stepping into this season. He's the easiest no-brainer. I think after that is where there's a lot of options, but more of where there's going to require some projection. And I think the first two guys we'll talk about, Trevor, two guys that are going to play in the same secondary. There's a lot of All-America candidates in this Notre Dame secondary this year.
Yeah, there are, and one of them has already been named an All-American. Tate Johnson was somebody who was an FWAA defensive freshman All-American, and if he just is able to remain healthy and repeat the production that he had last year, obviously from a Notre Dame schematic and a show titled Irish Breakdown, there's things that we want to, hey, clean up this area, get more comfortable here, read this a step quicker. But in the grand scheme of voting for All-Americans, if Tate Johnson ends the season with 4 interceptions and X amount of tackles and stays healthy for 12 games, I'm confident that he's going to be named an All-American. Now,
at least second team, right?
Exactly. Similar to some of the conversation we had on the offensive side of the ball, this is a pretty competitive year at safety, in my opinion. I mean, when you start thinking about KJ Bolden at Georgia, if one of the two Ohio State safeties has a breakout, you have Bryce
Both safeties at
Fitzgerald.
Bama.
Yeah, both
Both
safeties at
safeties at
Alabama.
Oregon.
Yes.
I mean, there's some dudes in college football this year at safety.
Yeah, man.
What if Rod Moore from Michigan gets back to his pre-knee injury form?
Yep.
He's another one. I mean, there's a lot of safeties in college football this year. We're taking everything you just said, and he's still not an All-American, either by getting overlooked or other guys are just better. I mean, that there's a real-world possibility where Tay is great this year. There's just 4 guys that are better. Real possibility of that.
Yep. Barring the injury discussion, it's if you are an All-American safety this year, it is earned.
Yes. Unless it's like some, for him, for sure. There's a world in where a couple other guys get named All-American where you're like, okay, sure. Okay. I watched Skid play, and you just saying that because of what he was preseason. But no, Bronte will have to earn it. There's no doubt. I think his game does need to improve. The production was there last year, but if you're getting into some of the nitty-gritty, let's nitpick between, and you're doing a real All-American analysis where you're actually studying the players, he does need to clean up some of the assignment correctness. And he got away with things last year, either A, because he did things against teams that weren't that good, or B, he's so rangy and instinctive that he was able to overcome a footwork mistake or an assignment mistake or, taking a bad angle out of his break. If he can clean those things up, my point is, Trev, his production takes an even bigger jump. Like now, all of a sudden, his production is on a level where you can't ignore the kid. Like, guys, he's got 8 interceptions this year. Returned 2 for touchdowns. Like, you can't ignore. And isn't there a guy named Fitzgerald or something like that from Miami who's a decent safety as well? I think maybe
you might be thinking of Bishop Fitzgerald. I think he's out of college.
The guy from USC, maybe, yeah. But no, I mean, the point is there's a lot of really good safeties in college football. So the production is going to need to be there, but he's also going to have to make sure that the film is also there for those who actually take the time to study film before they do their All-America rankings, which everyone should. If you're not willing to watch film of the kids you name as All-Americans, then you shouldn't be voting on an All-American list.
Yep.
You shouldn't be just looking off stats. That's silly.
One of the safeties that we didn't mention that Bryante could be in contention for competing for an All-American spot is lining up alongside of him in Notre Dame secondary, right. and that's Adon Shuler. He's going to be a captain in this upcoming season. Right now, I think he's on the New York tour along with like CJ and a couple of the other players, and he's going into his 3rd year in the starting lineup. You can't have a conversation about the top safeties in college football without talking about Adon Shuler.
And, there's always kind of that shiny new toy type of thing with Bryante Johnson, but Adon's been a steady force the last 2 years. He will also have an opportunity this year, Trev, to be an impactful player. And honestly, there's a world in which he has even a better chance than Bryante, because if you're looking around the secondary and you're thinking, who can we throw at? There aren't a lot of great options.
No.
There are some matchups where I think you're going to look and say, I'm going to test Adon Shuler this game. And how does he step up in those opportunities? I'm not saying it's wise. I'm saying when you're trying to pick between, we want to throw into the boundary, but I don't want to throw at Leonard Moore. Let's try to throw at 8, see what we can get done here. And I think I think there's going to be more opportunities for Adon to make impactful plays this year in the pass game, which is obviously going to be a big part of any opportunity he's going to have. Is you could be a great safety. It's kind of like Cam Hart in 2023. Cam Hart, in my opinion, was one of the 5 best cornerbacks in college football in 2023. But he got 0 talk for All-America honors. Why? Because he had no interceptions and only a few pass breakups because nobody threw at him.
Yeah.
And as I said, people don't study film. They just look at stats. Well, Adon has an opportunity, in my opinion, this year, Trev, to have the sort of the production that you need at the position. He's been, a top tackler. He had 53 tackles last year. If he just cleans up his tackling, he's going to have a chance to add 10 to 12 more tackles onto his statistics at the end of the year. But I also think that in year 2 of this system, he's going to be a really impactful second-level defender, meaning coming down and fitting off of the linebacker. So, like, linebackers on the second level turn into first-level players as they shoot gaps, and then, they're being replaced, in run fits by the safety, and they do that a lot with Adon. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Adon to make impact plays this year, and he's another guy that's in that conversation.
As is Boubacar Traore. He's another player that now, after we kind of get past, like, there's certain levels of projection that you need for any player on this defense, not named Leonard Moore, things Tay has to work on, things Adon have to work on. But I think once you start getting down to Boubacar, it's like, okay, now you need to see a bigger jump. Traore's going to have to make a bigger jump than what Schuler or Tay are going to have to do. Now we're confident that he can do it. That's why we're talking about it.
Right.
But he's a player. He comes back. He was their team leader in pressures, tackles for a loss, and sacks last season. And I think he's due for now 2 years removed from the knee injury. I think he's in a prime position to put himself in that conversation.
I agree completely. And when you look at Boubacar, when he might be at the deepest position of what we talked about when it comes to All-America honors, in that even at quarterback, where there's a lot of guys getting mentioned, I don't think that All-America people are going to have any issue putting CJ Carr over Arch Manning and Dante Moore if he plays to an All-America level. Because there's even people that, like, you can listen to some people talk like, yeah, I think Arch and Dante and so are right here, but I got my eye on CJ Carr because I think there's people looking to see what CJ is going to do this year statistically, because his numbers don't stack up, to what he's. I think of Julian, Dante, and Arch, I think CJ is the only one that didn't pass for 3,000 yards. I think he's the only one that didn't account for like 30 plus touchdowns, I believe. I know Arch did when you count his rushing stats. I know that Julian, I believe, threw for over 30. I believe Dante was over 30, but I'm actually checking that right now. I might be wrong on that, but I thought he was. Yeah, he was at 30 passing touchdowns to go with 2 rushing touchdowns. So, like, I think there's people that are kind of looking to see if CJ can step up. I don't know that a lot of All-America people are like, I want to see what this Boubacar Traore guy at Notre Dame is going to do, because they're just like, look, dude, we've got Colin Simmons, you've got Dylan Stewart, you've got Cleb Lubin, you've got all these great All-America players coming back. Like, I'm looking at those guys. I don't think they're paying a lot of attention to Boubacar, which is why Boubacar's got to come out and say, okay, announce yourself with authority. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you got to do. And he's got an opportunity to do that. And he's got an opportunity to put up really good numbers in the first 6 games of the year. And that's going to be the big thing for Boubacar. Early in the year, you've got to put up numbers. I mean, we're talking, if you want to be an All-American, you got to finish the year with high double-digit sack numbers, meaning like not 12 and 11 and 12 and 10, because we saw with Isaiah Foskey, I think he got like, 1 or 2 second-team All-America honors the year he had like 12 and 10 and 12 and 11. You want to produce with the guys that are going to be in college football this year, you've got to be 15 plus and 10 plus to be in the conversation, in my opinion, for All-America honors. Well, Boubacar was 10 and 6.5, or 10 and a half and 6 last year, or 10 and 6.5 last year. I forget which one it was. That was pretty good for a first-year starter, but you need to now see that big jump now that he goes into year 2 as a starter, and be a guy that's 50. It was 10 and 6.5. Be that kind of big time play. I mean, you look at like David Bailey last year for Texas Tech. He had 19.5 tackles for loss last season. I mean, and a guy that a lot of people don't talk about I don't know if you've seen him, Trev, but Anthony Smith from Minnesota, who's a really good football player, that had big time numbers last year at Minnesota, 17.5 tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks in the Big Ten. So there's a lot of guys like that in college football that you're like, dude, if you're going to want to be on that level, you've got to produce on that level. And he's got the tools to do it. Now it's just about time, can he accomplish that? And the thing about Boubacar is he's always been, Trev, a very toolsy, flashy player. It's now time for him to kind of finish better and bring some of that consistency to the table that he did last season. And I think he's got the tools to do it. It's just, you're going to have to do it pretty consistently if you want to go out there and be in the conversation for All-American players.
Yeah, similar to the conversation I said about Anthony Knapp, Boubacar is going to have the opportunity to kind of win an indirect matchup. You got Miami coming to town on November 7th under the lights. They have Damon Wilson and Marquise Lightfoot, and they have a lot of players coming in that, especially Damon Wilson, who could be in contention with some of those guys that you mentioned just from his production as a pass rusher. If a lot of the attention starts going to 5 in the blue and gold in that game, even though people were expecting to go and pay attention to maybe Damon Wilson versus the Gerby Lambert matchup or Will Black matchup, I think that would bode very well for Boubacar as well.
I agree. And look, that's going to be big for Notre Dame. If Boubacar can become that guy, that's going to do a lot for Notre Dame. And I think the talent around him this year is going to be a little bit more impactful from the standpoint of there were good football players on the team last year, but there weren't guys like, who are you game planning around other than Boubacar? Bryce never showed you the consistency to say, hey, we got a really game plan to stop 95. Jared Dawson's a really good player, but I don't know that any good team went into that game saying, boy, if we got to make sure 93 doesn't destroy us today. I mean, he's a good player. We love Jared Dawson, but he wasn't like what you needed to do when you were game planning for Notre Dame when Riley Mills was a D tackle like you. We got a game plan for him, 99. And I think that could be different this year. I think Bryce has a chance to be that guy this year where it's like, dude, you better have a game plan for 95 also, because if you're just going to put all your attention on 95 is going to rip you up. You know, I think there's some potential inside. If Jason Onye can be the guy all year that he was the second half of last season, now all of a sudden it's a little bit more attention to him. If Tion Gray or Francis Brewer are really able to step up and be difference makers. If Kingston, when he gets healthy as a pass rusher, there's just going to be times where it's like, dude, you just can't put all your attention on stopping 5 like teams did last year. I think that's another reason why Boubacar has that chance, to where there may be times where he's the one getting the cleanup sack that was caused by Bryce or Kingston or Drake or one of the interior guys. So I think that's something that also should help him a little bit with just being able to come out and be that All-American kind of player.
You mentioned Kingston, and let's talk about the linebackers, because this is one where, unfortunately, a lot of All-American voters will just kind of pay attention to overall numbers. One of the benefits of Notre Dame's defense this year is they returned 5 guys at linebacker. One of, I guess if you could call it one of the detriments of doing that, and I use that term loosely, is because I don't know if any one individual player is going to put up enough numbers to get All-American honors in comparison to, the Ben Roberts kid at Texas Tech, who'll probably have over 100 tackles, or you have Matt Romine coming in. A lot of great candidates this year, but one of those players is Kingston, and he's somebody that I don't think we're going to have to wait long to see what his impact is going to be, really the linebackers in general. Health is always going to be a question for him, and that is one of my hangups of not talking about him in the same light as Brayante Johnson or a Don Schuler. Not ready to really put him in the same light as Leonard Moore. If he was healthy coming back into this season, he'd be much closer to Leonard Moore than in the bottom part of this list. But the linebackers in general, we're not going to have to wait long to see their impact. Week 1, they're playing a Wisconsin team that, even though they're favored by 19.5 points on FanDuel, they're going to be a run-heavy football team. Linebackers will be an impact, but I'm very curious to see what they do this year.
I'm just glad you pulled a Brian and called him Matt Romine instead of Austin Romine. You pulled a Brian. You pulled a Brian. I've had a bad effect on you, Trev. I'm so sorry.
When I said it, I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Romine but even signed. Like, weren't you like 8 when he signed with Notre Dame? I absolutely love it.
That doesn't sound right, but I'm going to say it with enough conviction.
Maybe nobody notices. I notice because I do that all the time, and I feel like a moron when I do it. So I'm just glad somebody else did it. You know what I mean, Vince? I mean, Trevor. So, no, look, you look at linebackers. Kingston, to me, is he healthy? And can he start the season like he finished it? I mean, Trevor, he had 5.5 tackles for loss and 2.5 sacks in the last 5 games. If he performs like that all season, he's got a chance to be an All-American caliber player. But here's the interesting thing about Kingston is he's going to have to do one of 2 things. He's going to have to really jump his disruptive numbers, meaning like he had 1 pick last year, maybe give me 2, maybe give me 3. You had 7.5 tackles for loss. You got to be over 10. You had 3 sacks. You got to be, over, 7 or more, more pass breakups, or you need to really jump your tackle numbers. Like, he's not going to be an All-American at 50 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. I just don't think he's going to get the recognition to be that kind of player. Now, ironically, it's not like we haven't seen that before. Arvell Reese last year was around those numbers in the regular season, but I think that Arvell Reese was a situation where he did a lot of his damage in the regular season and early. Because if you actually go back and look last year, Arvell Reese did not have a single tackle for loss in the last 5 games last year. So he finished with 10. But by the time he started kind of not making plays, part of it because they were playing bad teams in November, and then he got shut out in the playoffs. But big reason why is he had already built that reputation by then. And so I don't, will Kingston be able to do that this year? It's a fair question. And so that's kind of how I look at it Travis. He's going to have to really jump his numbers up to be that. The other linebacker that I have my eye on is Drake Bowen, and I think for him it's really about, will he have the tackle production to be an All-American? But if he can now get into the double digits in tackles for loss, if he can be around 75, 80 tackles, be over 10 tackles for loss, 3-4 sacks, he's got a chance to step in there. I think one thing that could help Drake too is if he can make a few more plays in the pass game, I think that could help him as well. And because you don't need to have like 120 tackles. Again, if you play for one of the better teams in the country, your numbers don't necessarily have to always be, what somebody else did. So I think that's going to be a big thing for me with him is I want to see Drake have some of those clutch plays as well. And if he can do that, then, 75, 80 tackles, 10 plus tackles for loss, 4 plus sacks, 2 plus interceptions, and just be the leader of the best defense in college football, he's a guy that could be in that conversation as well.
Drake is a guy who, similar to CJ, I think will benefit the better Notre Dame does as a team this upcoming season as well. I go back and look at some of the All-American linebackers from last year. Obviously, you had Jacob Rodriguez, you had Arvell Reese, and then you also had CJ Allen at Georgia. Georgia won the SEC championship last year. Ohio State went undefeated in the regular season. And then obviously Jacob Rodriguez put up just
crazy numbers. He was over 100 tackles. Yeah.
Seven picks or something like that. It was a spectacular season. I think Drake will also have the opportunity to benefit from Notre Dame going undefeated in the regular season or something.
Because CJ Allen was an All-American last year. He had 88 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Those aren't knock the world, like the world on fire numbers. But CJ Allen had the reputation. Fair or not, he had the reputation. Drake doesn't have that same love nationally. He should, but he doesn't. So that's why I think the production has got to be there. But it's another one that if he dominates in the big games, like BYU is the game that I'm looking to see Drake potentially putting himself, thrusting himself into this conversation. Because the way that they play, that could be a Drake Bowen 12-13 tackle game. It really could. There's a lot of plays that Drake made last year at or slightly past the line of scrimmage on the offensive favor. The big key for him is still make those plays, but split second faster to where now you're tackling behind the line to rack up those TFL numbers. I think that's going to be a big part of a potential run from Drake Bowen to become an All-American. So, that's 6 guys right there. And the more of them play like that, the more of them I think start getting some of that love. Because it's what the defense is really wild because we see all this love for the Notre Dame defense. Like the Pickle had his top defenses in the country this year. And I think he had Notre Dame 3rd, Oregon number 1, which is a whole different conversation that you and I were talking about before the show. Why is Oregon assumed to be this number 1 defense when A, Notre Dame was better last year, and B, Notre Dame has more coming back than they did last year, but whatever. But they're the hot program. Where when you look at Notre Dame, it's almost kind of like the starting lineup at Notre Dame is Leonard Moore and a bunch of solid players. The only guy that gets any All-American love at Notre Dame besides Leonard Moore is a guy who didn't even start last year and is coming off of a knee injury. Now, I think that hype is justified. It's just kind of funny that we don't hear anything about Drake or not a whole lot about Briante as far as an elite safety. He's he's an up-and-comer, but we don't hear a lot about Adon. We don't hear a lot about Boubacar. I'm you guys show all this love to Notre Dame. What are the odds that Notre Dame has a top 3 defense and only has 1 All-American next year? What are the odds of that? Very slim. Very slim. So then it's okay, then who gets enough of that attention? And I think those 6 guys are the most obvious, but there's a few sleepers to talk about here as well, Trevor.
Let's talk about Christian Gray. The starting field corner on Notre Dame's defense the last 2 seasons has been kicked inside the nickel and is seemingly going to be the starting nickel. He'll continue to get pushed in fall camp, something we'll continue to preview as the offseason goes on. But he's another player that he's one of the most experienced starters in the entire secondary, up there with, up there with everybody not named Briante Johnson, I guess. But he's one of your most experienced starters. He's developed a reputation amongst Notre Dame fans to be a little bit feast or famine. But one of the bright sides is he's one of the few players on Notre Dame's defense where I think national people view Christian Gray a little bit more highly than what Notre Dame fans do.
There's a group of Notre Dame fans that have a really ignorant view of Christian Gray. I'm just going to come out and say it. And it's what happens to corners. It's if they have a bad game, people just aren't going to get over it. And Christian's had 2 really bad games against USC. And then obviously couldn't make that play late against Ohio State. But what's missed is there's a lot of really good football in there too. Christian Gray last year finished 10th or 15th in all of college football in pass breakups with 11, and he only played 10 games. I'd also like to point out, when you look at when he came back from missing the 2 games with his shoulder injury that he'd struggled with all year, he only allowed 1 completion in the last 3 games on 8 targets. Like, that's the thing about Christian Gray is I think some of the views are ignorant, but they're also understandable because of how some fans just only pay attention to a cornerback when they either make a pick or get beat. And they have no ability and when I say ability, that's not an insult like people don't know how to evaluate corners. It's like when you watch TV, corners aren't on the screen a whole lot. That's the reason you only evaluate them when they give up a catch or when they pick a pass off. So when I say inability, it's not like you guys you don't have the ability to evaluate cornerbacks. I just mean like most people watch the game on television and you don't see the corners a whole lot. You don't see the great downfield coverage a whole lot when you're seeing those things. And so I think people have really missed the boat on Christian Gray, on how good he has been 85 to 90% of the time. The problem is his 10% where he's not great. Like Leonard Moore's a similar percentage, but when Leonard Moore gets beat, it's like he gave up a comeback route because he was late to respond to the top end of a comeback. He lets a guy catch a slant on him and then tackles him for a 12-yard gain. When Christian Gray makes those mistakes, he gives up a 60-yard touchdown or a 50-yard gain. That's the problem. It's when he doesn't do what he needs to do, it's a huge play. And that's something he has to clean up. And if he can do that, then he's a really good football player. He finished 5th in all of college football last year in passes defense per game. 5th. Higher than it was a 5th or 3rd. I think it was 5th. He was 5th, and I think Christian and Leonard Moore was 8th last season. And Leonard Moore had 12 pass breakups in 10 games, and passes defense, and Christian had 13 in 10 games. So he's just got to get rid of some of the bad games. Unfortunately, with USC not being on the schedule this year, maybe that won't be as much of a problem.
Saying, like, hey, maybe.
You know what I mean? Like, we'll see. But look, the reality is I think the criticism is typical fan stuff, overreacting, and now it's the cool thing to do to pound on Christian Gray on X. You know, that's how some of the low IQ people like to do. You know, and it just becomes like a talking point. But like people that know football, that really study football, they look at Christian Gray and say, dude, there's a lot of good there, but your bad is really bad. And that's what you've got to fix. And he has to fix it. That's valid. That is a valid criticism. That dude, your bad wasn't giving up a 3rd and 8 conversion. Your bad was giving up a 60-yard route where you're like, dude, what are you doing on that play?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what you're doing there. And so I think that's the stuff he's got to clean up. If he can clean that up, then he's a really good player. Really good player. But if he can't clean it up, I think the talent is now good enough that you may have to say, hey, man, you got to stop being that way, because we got guys that I think could be more consistent now. But, you know, he's a really good player. He's a really good player when he's locked in. He just has to stop not being not locked in as much as he does. That's going to be the big key.
One player I'm interested to see now that he's in South Bend is DJ McKinney. He was a really good cornerback in 2024. He battled injuries in 25. He's coming to South Bend for his final year of eligibility, and he's back in, I would say, a comfortable role for him, because in 24, some of the best football he played, he was playing opposite of the Heisman Trophy winner. Now, Travis Hunter didn't just win the Heisman Trophy because he was a lockdown corner. It's because he was a unicorn type of athlete. But DJ McKinney is walking into a situation where he is now in a, I guess you could call it a unicorn in terms of like Notre Dame cornerbacks, because we're talking about Leonard Moore being one of the best since, or potentially one of the best in general. I think DJ McKinney's going to have the opportunity to produce a lot this upcoming season, because there's a lot of All-American candidates or a lot of All-American voters that only pay attention to how many passes did you intercept, how many touchdowns did you allow. Like you said about a Don Schuler, they're going to have to target somebody. And I just can't believe in my mind, whether I'm a football guru or not, that offensive coordinators are just going to continue trying to pick on Leonard Moore. I can't believe that. And it's got to go somewhere.
And the teams that did it last year were teams that weren't very good.
Yeah.
Look, if I'm looking at Notre Dame, the first guy I'm going to go after is Christian Gray, because I know that he's going to lock me down a lot, but I want to catch him on that one time he's not locked in, and I'm going to get a big play. Then I'm going to kind of think about a Don Schuler with some of my tight end running back matchups. But the other guy that I'm going to look at and say, hey, let's go with that guy is DJ McKinney. And it's not because he can't play. It's because, like, you got to throw somebody. And then at field, you've got more space to work with. He's going to be playing off coverage more. But the reality is he's also going to be getting targeted a lot. And those opportunities are going to be there. I mean, he only played 9 games last year. And obviously, as we talked about, had some struggles last season. But when you look at what he did the year before, when he was getting targeted a lot more, he was a pretty darn good football player that year. Got targeted 71 times, only gave up 52.1% completion rate, which, by the way, is lower than what Leonard Moore gave up last year. And had what I think was it like 3 interceptions, Trev, and like 9 pass breakups, I think is what he did at Colorado 2 years ago.
Sounds right.
Really good football player. And you watch the film. I mean, he was a guy that just was steady Eddie for them. And so what could happen this year, and do I think he's a first or second team All-American talent? Maybe not. Close. He's more talented than maybe some Notre Dame fans realize, but like, he's not Leonard Moore. He's not that caliber talent, but he's a really good talent who I think is going to get targeted a lot, which sets up opportunities for him to make a lot of plays on the ball and make some big plays and get some interceptions and some key breakups and things like that, where he gets a little bit more attention. That's where we could see him maybe jumping into this All-America conversation. I mean, heck, there was a year where the best cornerback and the best DB in all of college football didn't win the Jim Thorpe Award because his teammate did. You know, thinking of Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant. So, I mean, sometimes that happens. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but that's why I think DJ is in the conversation. And look, I don't see this one either, but I think perhaps there's a D tackle that could maybe have a breakout year. I could see like a Jason Onye becoming like a double-digit tackle for loss guy if he can kind of, you know, consistently be the guy he was late last year. Jason was very productive in the second half of last year, Trev. We've talked a lot about it. Maybe he can start – he's going to have to make a lot more plays behind the line of scrimmage than he did even last year. He had 1.5 tackles for loss. They came in, 2 of the last 3 games. But maybe he breaks out, maybe like a Francis Brew, a Tion Gray. I don't see it. I don't predict it, but I think it was at least worth mentioning here on defense.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if Jason Onye can be who he was in the first half of 2024 and the second half of 2025 and just put those together, he could be due for a big season. I'm with you. Not confident enough to predict it, but definitely worth mentioning.
Yep, got my eye on.
Let's talk about the freshman All-Americans, because unlike the offensive side of the ball where there was 5 candidates, really 6 candidates who had the opportunity to be a freshman All-American, that list is a little bit shorter on the defensive side of the ball, but there are 2 guys that absolutely are in position to do so. And the first one is Joey O'Brien at safety. I mean, he's somebody that, barring his health and his ability to come back sooner rather than later, I think could put himself in that conversation as well.
Yeah, Joey's an interesting player because he's another guy when you talk about opportunities. If they're putting him on the field, when you say who they're going to throw at, that's one of the things that we got to talk about too, is there are snaps where your starters aren't on the field. It's like, okay, I've got Bronte Johnson on the field. I got Christian Gray, DJ McKinney, and Leonard Moore. Hey, that number 20 is a freshman. Let me see if I can do something to him. And, those are times when I say that he's got a chance to step in and be a guy that makes some impact plays next year and can get on some freshman All-America teams. We're not talking about postseason All-America. We're talking about freshman All-America teams. I think Joey O'Brien's a guy to keep an eye on. Now, he's got to get back to being healthy, but he's a guy to keep an eye on. Because, like, when he's on the field, when Luke Tauch is on the field, when Dallas Golden is on the field, when Mark Zacker's on the field, that's when they're really going to go at those guys, even more so than the other guys. It's like, that's when you say, okay, who are they going to go after? It's those guys that you're going to see teams go after, which could set up some of those guys' chances to make plays. Now, Dallas and Mark and Luke aren't going to be an All-America conversation as non-starters, but Joey could be, because we're talking about freshman All-American, not overall, and he's the only one of the guys we mentioned that could be there in that conversation. So, because Dallas is not a red shirt, Mark's not a red shirt, Luke's a senior, but I could see Joey making some impact plays, and all of a sudden we're in the freshman All-America conversation with him. Now, the question is, will he produce enough numbers as a rotation piece to get in there? Can he get 30-some tackles, 3 or 4 picks, Like that's going to be like Joey O'Brien making the 3 picks and 3 breakups that Luke Tauch had last year with maybe he can get over 30 plus tackles. That could get you in the conversation. Now, part of that depends on there may be 4 starters at safety at other big programs that are putting up 60, 70 tackles, and that keeps him out. But he's at least in the conversation.
The amount of opportunities for him on the field will be very interesting. The other thought that popped into my head is I know he's not in contention for freshman All-American, but if Dallas Golden ends up being an All-American this year, this defense is going to be absolutely just filthy. But I just had to fit that in there because goodness gracious. The other freshman, Brian, is Rodney Dunham. He is somebody where, again, you start talking about the opportunities of what he'll get on the field with Boubacar and Bryce coming back, and then Keon Keeley is really starting to surge here in South Bend. But Rodney Dunham will undeniably play this year. The question is in what capacity, and is he going to be able to produce enough to earn All-American honors? He's going to make good plays this year for Notre Dame's defense. I don't think you or I have a doubt about that. But is he going to be All-American caliber-esque? I think it has the potential to be, but it'll be what moments do you do them in? I mean, if Rodney Dunham is earning snaps against BYU, maybe even potentially Miami and then SMU.
Which I think he will.
Yep.
I think he will. Yep.
If he's able to take advantage of those opportunities, I think that he is going to be well in consideration to be a freshman All-American.
It's like with a lot of things, Trev, is as a rotation player, will the numbers match those of guys who are playing and starting as freshmen and redshirt freshmen? Like that's going to be kind of the conversation. That could be what could keep him out, but he's going to produce, I think. Like I could see him having 5 sacks this year as part of the rotation and as part of the, maybe the nickel package at times. Like you said, though, and some of it could be he's in there in the third quarter when they're starting to, they haven't put in the backups yet, but they're taking Boubacar off. They're taking Onye off, and you could see some snap opportunities there to get those numbers. But then it's going to come down to, if you really want to be a freshman All-American, when you play BYU, you've got to make you got to play well. When you play Miami, you got to play well. I'm not saying he's got to have 2 sacks in each of those games, but like you've got to show that, hey man, you're a really good football player and make some of those plays. And so that's something I want to see from him.
Brian, it is time to preview Notre Dame's 7th opponent of the regular season here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're talking about the BYU Cougars, who the discussion about the Notre Dame BYU matchup really started last year after Notre Dame elected to sit out of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And then everybody started looking forward to this matchup here on October 17th out in Provo, Utah. And this is a game where, you and I would like to see this series extended past 2027 because I think it would be beneficial for both programs. Yeah. I think that'd be a lot of fun to watch in future seasons.
That's a big one, Trev. So before we jump into that, I do want to reiterate that because it's like that became like a trendy thing this summer. This is something you and I have been talking about since they announced this game.
Yep.
I would love to see Notre Dame and BYU schedule something more long-term. And I felt this way for a long time. This isn't new. This is something that I felt for a while. I just think there's just something intriguing about the contrast of these two schools, and, the fact that for a long time they were the outsiders, trying to compete. Now, BYU wasn't an independent, but like they were a WAC team. They won his national championship or I think we're co-national champions as a WAC team, Western Athletic Conference. I don't mean like, well, those guys are WAC. I mean, that was literally the name of their conference. It's the WAC, WAC, the Western Athletic Conference.
Yeah.
And, produced a Heisman Trophy winners. And they had that really like revolutionary West Coast offense under, Lavelle Edwards. And the contrast in uniforms, the white helmets with the Y in it compared to the gold helmets and the navy blue compared to the royal blue, or, and there was, the team that threw the ball all the time compared to the team that ran the option. And there's just all these contrasts. And then, oh, by the way, Catholics is one school's Catholic, the other school's Mormon, and in some ways they hold very high standards of their student athletes, but it's also very different in a lot of ways, and so, it's a very interesting kind of comparison between those two schools that I think can make for a really fun rivalry, non-conference rivalry. And you got all these Big 12 teams saying, hey, we're not afraid of Notre Dame. Well, put your money where your mouth is. Schedule make a long-term schedule like Clemson did. I would love to see that. I would love to see Notre Dame do that. Now, would I like to see maybe a 10-year deal? I don't know. I mean, I'd be fine with it, but like maybe it's 4 on, 2 off, 4 on, 2 off, whatever. But I would love to see Notre Dame and BYU do something more regularly. And that's not because I think it's an easy wins, because I don't think it will be. You know, the more times you go out to Provo, the more opportunity there is to get beat. I mean, that's just the reality of it, you know.
Yep.
But it's because they're a good program, because they're a team that we respect. They are a team that you got to go out there and you got to ball out for if you want to win those games, is why I would love to see this rivalry like be created. It's not a rivalry now. I'd love to see it be created. I think right now there's this disdain for Notre Dame from BYU fans because Notre Dame refused to go out there and play them. Like, Notre Dame did not duck BYU in that they were afraid to play BYU, but Notre Dame did refuse to do what they contractually obligated to do, which is go out and play in Provo again. That's fair to say. I mean, you're taking it too far when you're like, you know, they ducked BYU. We're ducking BYU. There's a lot of years Notre Dame would have liked to have played BYU instead of some of the other teams on the schedule because they weren't good in those years. There's been years they've been very good. It was there were other reasons why, and I don't agree with that. They should have gone out and played BYU. And I didn't like how Texas and Notre Dame kind of convinced BYU to go independent and then didn't follow through on the promises they kind of behind-the-scene promises they made to BYU to get them to go independent and leave the Mountain West. I'd be pissed about that if I was a BYU fan. I would. And this would be kind of a way to, rectify that, is to kind of create a little bit of a longer-term rivalry. But beyond that, Trip, I just think it'd be a really good rivalry, a really good matchup. And it's one of the few Big 12 schools I'd have any desire to create any kind of long-term relationship with. I could say I don't know that there is another Big 12 school that I'd have any desire to have a long-term relationship with than BYU.
Yeah, BYU is that school for me as well. You and I have been pounding our fists on the table for months that this needs to be something that continues. And a lot of it has been because of their most recent track record. I mean, the last 2 seasons, Kalani Sitake is 23-4. And you mentioned it. People are, crying about Notre Dame's schedule and they don't play anybody and yada, yada, yada. Well, hey, BYU was a somebody. Mm-hmm. They also had they had more of an argument to be in the college football playoff last year than Texas did. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were right up there with Notre Dame and one of the teams that should have been fighting for a spot above Alabama getting into the college football playoff. Mm-hmm. So that kind of begs the first question when we dive into the overview here, when we look at the Cougars, is, are they here to stay? Were the last 2 years kind of not necessarily a flash in the pan because Kalani Sitake is a good coach, but are they going to remain in playoff contention? Will they be that type of team this year? And I think that's interesting when you look at the pieces they bring back, the coaching experience that they have, but also some of the pieces that they lost.
Trev, you said something interesting, and it reminds me of an article that you recently wrote about Notre Dame. And you talked about how Notre Dame is a team that is good in all the right places. And that's kind of why when you have this conversation, like, is BYU just a bit of a flash in the pan team that just was good for a couple of years, but they're going to kind of fade back down? Kind of like TCU was a couple of years ago. They had a couple really good years, and then they kind of came back down to earth, and they were just kind of a solid Big 12 team. Is the thing that makes me think that is like BYU, what makes them unique. And again, it's another one of the reasons I would really like to see Notre Dame play them, because I think you actually get something out of it, is because they're built a way that you want a team that Notre Dame faces to be built. They're not a gimmicky offense that like running east and west and trapping and pulling and it's an offense. They play big boy football. They're going to come at you. They're going to run at you offensively. They're going to run at you on defensively, and you gotta put your big boy pants on when you're going to play BYU. And that's good. You want that when you're playing a team like this. You want that challenge with your Notre Dame, and you don't want years. I don't know that having them as the best team on your schedule or second best team on the schedule is like ideal. You'd like to have maybe, but third, fourth, certainly. And so it's a very intriguing game. But when you look at it, it's where are they good? In the trenches, at quarterback, at running back, at corner, at line. I mean, they're good in the right places. This year defensively, I'm a little bit more concerned about the D-line, which we'll get to, but like last year they were pretty good there, but their O-line is really good. Their quarterback is a really good young player. They've got, maybe one of the best backfields in college football. Like, I wouldn't rank Bear in the top 10 as far as quarterbacks. We've talked about this, but if you say, hey, does BYU have a top 10 backfield? That's a different conversation, because there's some guys that we would look at and say, well, that guy's a top 10 quarterback, but the backfield is not great. Well, Bear's not a top 10 quarterback, but the backfield is very good. And so I look at all those things and factor it in and think this is a team that is a legit team. The last 2 years were not flash in the pans.
Agreed.
You know, I think Texas Tech showed last year there are some areas they still have to get better, but this is a really good football team. Really good football team. And they're coached very well and they're physical. And that's something that will be good for Notre Dame to have that kind of game a few weeks before they play Miami. Be very important.
I mean, recently on the Big 12 Media Day, they took a coaches poll of who they thought was going to win the conference. And some of it had to do with the whole Brendan Sorsby drama at Texas Tech, but a lot of people thought it was going to be BYU. Going through and reading preseason magazines, a lot of people thought it was going to be BYU for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. They're very physical. They're very well coached. They're a very veteran team for just how their student athletes are going on mission trips. And then, so they're not, Kalani Sitake has a lot of like Kahanu Kias to work with that have like a lot of life experience, and so for all of those reasons, I'm with you completely. And this year, when you look at their schedule, it sets up somewhat favorably for them to go on a good run this year.
Yeah, look, here's the thing about their schedule. It's very manageable for them to maybe get into the playoff, either A, as getting back to the Big 12 championship and maybe winning it this year, or being in a position where if this year they go 11-1 and get beat in the Big 12 championship, perhaps their schedule is still good enough where they could get in still as an at-large. I think it's that balance. Now it would be tough if you lose to Notre Dame and then whoever the next best team in the Big 12 is, but it put them in position just like last year did. But here's what I like about their schedule this year. They play at TCU, who's a good football team and could once again be a 9-win team. They play at Utah. Let's see how good Utah is. Arizona, you play, who's a really good football team. They could be a 9-10 win team again this year. That's at home. So you've got two really good road games to kind of prove yourself. You've got a really good game against Arizona. If they can go toe-to-toe with Notre Dame, if they beat Notre Dame and don't win the Big 12 championship, they're in the playoff unless they drop another couple games. Like that's what the Notre Dame game does for them, just like Miami last year. For this whole notion of why should you play Notre Dame? And I'm like, well, Miami is exactly why you should play Notre Dame. You take that game away and you give them somebody other than Notre Dame, right? Who did Miami have 2 years ago in their non-conference, Trev? So they had Florida State, who wasn't good. They had Florida, who wasn't very good. They played Florida A&M and Ball State and USF. This year they played Florida and Notre Dame. Florida still wasn't very good. So you replace Ball State in 2024 or 2025. You say, okay, Notre Dame, they don't play Notre Dame. They play another Indiana team. They play Ball State again. And then they go lose to Louisville and they go lose to SMU. Guess what Miami's doing in the postseason? Same thing Notre Dame was. They're sitting at home, not watching the playoff. They're not in it. Because why do I know that? Because that's exactly what happened to them the year before. They went 10-2, had the number one offense in the country, but nobody respected them for beating up a bad Florida team and Florida State who wasn't very good. What's their big win other than Notre Dame? The Notre Dame game is the only thing on their resume that got Miami into the playoffs last year. That's it. Well, now BYU's in that situation where they get that home game against Notre Dame. The rest of their schedule is quality, but not great. It's manageable. So if they can avoid the upsets and then beat Notre Dame and then they go lose in the Big 12 championship, they're sitting there at 11-2, 12-1. They're in. They have a great shot to be in, I should say. Who knows with the committee now, but I think they're in. So I think that's what that Notre Dame game does for them. If they lose to Notre Dame, it's just got to be close.
Yep.
Like a legit 4-quarter, not a game where like Notre Dame's always up 14 and then you score late to make it. It's never really competitive. It's got to be a game where it's like, man, Notre Dame won that one, but boy, BYU put up a good fight. And then you run the table in the Big 12, and then now let's see what happens in the Big 12 title game. Because I think what also hurt BYU last year in the Big 12 title game and the loss to Texas Tech is it's not that they went 0-2 against Texas Tech. It's they went 0-2 against Texas Tech and weren't competitive in either game. That's more of what hurt them. I'd be very curious to see what their ranking would have looked like last year if both of those games were 4-quarter games. But they what was the one, like 29-0? Right? Wasn't the regular season game like 29-0? Let me go find it here real quick. Let me look at BYU's schedule from last year because they don't have Texas Tech on this one. But so they lost to Texas Tech at 29-7 and then 34-7. Those games weren't competitive. if they can be competitive this year, Trev, maybe then an 11-2 BYU is sneaking into the playoffs, especially in a year where there actually are some Big Ten teams that have decent schedules this year, unlike last year, where they have enough teams that can lose 2 or 3 games. So that's kind of why I look at BYU. That's why I think they're a legit playoff team again this year, even if they lose Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm of the same impression of BYU. I think that they're going to be here to stay in the playoff conversation. BYU will have the opportunity to pick up some notable wins in October. The month of October for them is going to be huge. You're on the road against TCU, home against Iowa State, Notre Dame in back-to-back weeks. You travel out to USF, and then you round out the month hosting Arizona State. Two of your biggest home games this season will be on your own turf, obviously 2 of your biggest home games are at home. You guys know what I meant. 2 of the biggest games you play this season are at home. You get Notre Dame and Arizona State. I was trying to find the way to.
I was going to let that one slide. I was
trying to think of a way to word that.
It's funny for me to make fun of you for doing that once. I do that more than once now. It looks like I'm actually criticizing you for it, and now it's in like, dude, you of all people should not be talking about people making the you meant to say this, but you said this. So I was gonna let that one slide.
No worries. I was trying to figure out a way to word that. I was waiting for the
their home games are at home. No way.
Their biggest home games are inside of Cougar Stadium. So just in case anybody was confused about that. But 2 of your biggest games of the season you get at home. You get Notre Dame, and then 2 weeks later you get Arizona State, a team that Brian and I are both very high on in the Sun Devils and what Kenny Dillingham has going on. So this is a prime opportunity for BYU to get cooking, and they have a lot working in their favor as well. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do. Let's talk about some of the things we like about BYU, Trev. We've talked about the toughness and the strength, but let's get to some specifics about BYU, Trev, and talk about some of the things we like about this Cougar football team. And when we break it down, I think the first thing you look at is the run game and everything and the parts that go into the run game. It's not so much the run game, it's the parts that make up for it. Really good veteran offensive line, one of the best backs in the country, guy vying for the best back on the schedule, certainly. I would say right now it's either him or Mark Fletcher from Miami. And then you've got a freshman quarterback coming back after throwing for over 3,000 yards last year, and he's a pretty darn good mobile threat. So I think those pieces are really where you start with what's the foundation for BYU this year. O-line, quarterback, running back. That's the foundation for this team. They should be very good in those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the core of what Kalani Sitake wants to do on offense. I mean, you go through and look at what those guys combined to do last year, and it was exceptional. On top of Bear Bachmeier's 3,000 yards passing, you bring back L.J. Martin, who rushed for 1,305 yards, 12 touchdowns. Bear Bachmeier added 11 touchdowns on the ground and 527 rushing yards. And then you and I have been very high on BYU's offensive line and what they return. Very high as in terms of Notre Dame's schedule. Obviously, we're getting ready to talk about the top 10 offensive lines here in the country in the next part of the show. We will mention BYU, but they have all of the right tools to be a very consistent team on the ground, and that's going to present a lot of challenges to some of these teams on their schedule. Everything that the Big 12 coaches talked about was the size and the physicality, and the BYU to other Big 12 teams is they have the size to compete in the playoffs. But some of the questions that we'll get into later, do they have the top level athletes? I don't know. But the foundation of their offense and their run game is going to be very, very strong this year. So we're definitely working in their favor.
Agree. That's really where it all starts with them. And now the key is obviously if you want to beat them, you've got to win there. If you win there, they're a lot easier to beat, which is easier said than done. I also think another part of their team that's very underrated, Trev, and fans of this show, this is not going to be new to anybody, but maybe the most underrated cornerback tandem in all in college football. With Evan Johnson gets a lot of love. Therian Alexander does not get as much attention. He's very good. This group will be in the conversation for best cornerback duo that Notre Dame is going to play this year. I'm not saying they're locked. I mean, Miami's has a good cornerback duo. There's a couple others that are good. I think Miami and BYU are at the top. I think it's a legitimate debate on who has the best duo, the best 1-2 punch at cornerback on the schedule. Against Notre Dame. And when you talk about strengths, that is absolutely one of the strengths of this football team. It's funny that we talk about BYU and big boy football, but the best part of their defense is their skill.
Yeah.
It's their corners and safeties, arguably. If you take one position group, I think it is corner, with all due respect to the linebackers. I think it is corner. And then you throw in the safety in there. It's like their secondary is very good. Very good.
If their cornerback duo played in Columbus or Tuscaloosa or Knoxville or Eugene or Athens, they would be getting significantly more. I mean, at this point now, South Bend, they would be getting significantly more attention. I'm very excited to see what DJ McKinney is going to do in South Bend. If for whatever reason one of Terry and Alexander or Evan Johnson entered the portal and came to Notre Dame, I would also be ecstatic. Like these are legitimate corners, and they are absolutely. It's 1A, 1B in my mind between them and Wisconsin. I agree with you completely. Their safety, Faletau Satuala, comes back. He led the team in tackles last year. He's a very productive player. But to your point, Brian, it's not just the secondary. Their linebacking core is also going to be a strength of this team as well. You factor in the fact that Isaiah Glasker comes back. They got Cade Uluave from the transfer portal from Cal, who was a very productive player last year. Their linebackers will also be a strength. Really, the back seven of BYU's defense is poised to be really good this year.
Linebacker right now is not as good as what the corners are, based on what we saw from Isaiah Glasker last year. But if he looks like the guy he was 2 years ago, it's kind of like we're saying about him what we said about DJ McKinney.
Yeah.
If Isaiah Glasker can be the guy he was 2 years ago at BYU, and Cade can be the kid that he was for Cal last year, the conversation about their linebacking core changes dramatically. 2 years ago, Isaiah Glasker was 14.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, had 3 picks, 70 tackles, 4 pass breakups. He was good. 6'5", 235. He didn't have a great year last year, in my opinion. Still solid, 67 tackles, 2 picks, 8.5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. He was no bum. He just wasn't quite as dynamic as he was 2 years ago. If he gets back to being that guy, and Cade's the same, now all of a sudden we are having a conversation about, dude, I actually think the linebackers at BYU might be better than the corners. That's where the asterisk is for me with BYU, is Isaiah Glasker could be the thing for them because he can rush the passer, he can cover, and he can play the run. Like he's got all the tools, in my opinion, to be one of the best linebackers in the Big 12 in a year where the Big 12 has a lot of really good linebackers, Trev. Like there's a lot of good linebackers in the Big 12 this year. But Isaiah Glasker is the key to me on their back seven. How good is he? That's going to have a lot of say but even if he just repeats what he did last year plus Cade, it's still really good. I mean, how many linebackers would love to have a down year in which they had 67 tackles, 2 picks, 8.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 10 quarterback hurries? Like that's still a pretty good year. It's just
that ain't too bad.
Like, dude, I thought he was really about to break out and have a national year last year. He just didn't do it. Can he get back on track this year? It's going to be very important for BYU that he does.
There are some questions that we have about BYU. However, there's a lot pointing in the right direction for them. But one of the top concerns that we have is pass catcher. 3 of their leading pass catchers from last year, Parker Kingston, Chase Roberts, and Carson Ryan, are no longer with the team for multiple different reasons. Chase Roberts and Carson Ryan graduated. We obviously know the situation going on with Parker Kingston.
Now, real quick, Trev, on that, have they officially said he's not going to be there this year?
He's able to play football this year, I believe, just not at BYU. That was my read on the situation.
Okay.
So it's very similar. It's actually identical to what Jake Retzlaff went through last year. And so that's
because he was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, the accusation, but he still wasn't able to play.
Yep. So Parker Kingston, I do not believe will be a factor for BYU this year. So as of today, their returning receiver returning pass catcher is technically LJ Martin. He had 36 catches, 255 yards last year. But as far as wide receiver goes, they returned JoJo Phillips and Tiger Bachmeier. They went to the portal. They got Kyler Casper, which is a very interesting prospect.
That's an intriguing one.
Yep. Agree completely. They also have Tay Nakua, who I also think is the younger brother of Puka Nakua.
I believe so, yeah.
So there are some pieces there. They brought in Walker Lyons from the transfer portal. That I think could be another. Walker Lyons and Kyler Casper could be the two X factors that make this passing attack okay. That and Bear Bachmeier taking the next step as a passer. So, but the outlook as of today is not as high as where it was last year. There's a lot of projection needed moving forward with this group. So as of today, it's a concern, but we should have some of those things answered by the time that Notre Dame travels out west on October 17th.
Yeah, we'll have a much better idea of how good that team is going to be with the skill positions. There's some former highly ranked recruits out there. Kyler Casper was a 4-star recruit. Walker Lyons was a borderline 5-star recruit, if I remember correctly. And who's played. It's not like he's like, well, you know, he's a high ranked recruit, but he's never really done anything. I mean, he had some pretty good moments at USC. So I'm very curious to see that. People in the chat talking about the Bachmeier names. I do think it's funny that one brother's name is Tiger, one brother's name is Bear, and the other brother's name is Hank. It's like, okay, you guys went a different direction with that one, right? So,
that's funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue there, man. Here's the one thing about the receiving core. I wonder if this is on purpose or just kind of the way the chips fall. They're going to be very tall at wide receiver, which I actually think is smart. The way that they like to run the ball and the concepts they like to run kind of have some back shoulder over the top. Big guy. Yeah, they're going to have 3 to 4 6'4" plus weapons at receiver this year, which I think is very intriguing. Very intriguing. But a lot of this is projection, Trev, and until they actually show it, it's a concern when you're breaking down BYU. It's an area where you have to say, hey, I think they could be really good here, but they need to show a lot. And they don't have like that's similar to what we talk about Notre Dame at receiver. But the difference is Notre Dame has Jordan Faison. They have Jaden Greathouse, guys that have shown it. BYU doesn't really have that, and that's why this is a question mark.
Even though we just got done raving about the back seven of BYU's defense and what it could be, one of the concerns is their outlook up front as of today. You know, you have top-level athletes in the back seven of your defense. I think Evan Johnson and Terrion Alexander are some of the best cornerback duos in the country. I think Isaiah Glasgow, if he returns back to Brian's point, his 2024 version, he could be nasty. Whereas the front four on their defensive line, you know, you got Bodie Schoonover coming back. Keanu Tanuvasa comes back. But none of those guys are really like how we feel about Boubacar or how we feel about Bryce or Tion Gray or Francis Brew. And so
looking at other teams, Damon Wilson, potentially Marquise Lightfoot, the kid from North Carolina. Like, yeah, even the two kids from Stanford, I think, are more athletic, dynamic players. So yeah, it's that is definitely a concern that I have about this defense is they are poised to potentially take a step back up front. They're going to need Keanu Tanuvasa to step up. Like, that was a guy that a lot of people were excited about going to BYU from Utah, and he just didn't make that jump. They're going to need him to be better. Because my question is, this is also why they really need Isaiah Glasgow to get back on track, because he's a guy that I think, you know, big, rangy and tall and pretty good athlete. I think there's things he can do in the pass rush that you know, kind of like what Kingston does for Notre Dame, you know, and they're going to need that because there's just not a lot of natural pass rushers. They're power rushers, and which is fine against a lot of the Big 12 teams. But when you get to a team like Notre Dame and they've got 6'7", 315, 325 athletic tackles, like, I don't know that's going to get the job done, you know. And so I think that's going to be a big thing. Here's the thing: even though last year was a bit of a down year for Isaiah Glasgow, he only had 20 pressures. His 20 pressures were second on the defense, and they're the best among anybody coming back. They only have 2 returners that had 20 pressures last year. I mean, like Bodie Schoonover only had 19 pressures last year on 235 pass rush snaps. Like, that's a big thing. That you play against a team like Notre Dame and you can't get after the quarterback, it's going to be a long night. I don't care how good your corners are. If they're not going to cover that long. Just like we saw, you know, when Notre Dame against Miami last year, they couldn't get pressure on the quarterback, and that allowed Malachi Toney and CJ Daniels and, you know, those guys to go out there and make some plays against the Notre Dame secondary. That's a big question mark for me. The D line, and then their ability, and like they were good against the run last year. They weren't dominant against the run last year, because I even think it was a bit of an issue for them last year. Texas Tech just controlled the line of scrimmage against their defense in both of those games. It's just that Texas Tech was the only team good enough to do that. When you're looking at Notre Dame, that could be a struggle for them this year as well.
One of the final concerns that we have about BYU is kind of just more overarching, and this is just per the team, and there's a lack of overall team speed. A lot of how I feel about BYU is what the narrative has been about Notre Dame the last couple of seasons. We're really kind of like from 2020 to like 22, 23 is like, okay, we know their defense is going to be solid. They're going to be physical and tough and well coached and assignment correct, but I question their top level athletes. And outside of Evan Johnson and Terry and Alexander, and if Isaiah Glasser can get back to form, LJ Martin's in that conversation. But I question their overall top level athletes. Is BYU just kind of who they are? Do they have anybody that can be a mismatch on the perimeter on offense? I don't know the answer to those questions. As of today, the overall just team speed, that right now they have a lot of veteran guys who have played a lot of football that are try hard, high motor dudes. You can win a lot of football. I mean, Kalani Sitake hasn't gone 23-4 the last 2 years because, in 24 and 25, he just had world-class athletes. And now this year they're all gone. So this is still a very well-coached football team, but their lack of team speed, I think when Notre Dame comes to town with some of Arizona State's portal additions that are coming to town, and if BYU makes the playoffs, that could be their kryptonite.
Exactly. I don't think it's going to hurt them against, a lot of teams on their schedule. We're still got their schedule put up. I don't think it's going to hurt them against Utah Tech. I don't think it's going to hurt them against Arizona, Colorado State, maybe TCU. TCU's a pretty athletic team. Don't think it's going to hurt them against Iowa State, UCF, even though USCF's a pretty decent athletic team. It could hurt them against Arizona State. Maybe it hurts them against Utah. Maybe it hurts them against Baylor. Maybe it hurts them against Kansas, who got Dylan Edwards. Shouldn't hurt them against Cincinnati. So, yeah, it is a legitimate question, Trevor, that you look at and say how well that gets solved is going to say a lot about this. I think it's more so, ironically, on their offense than it is their defense.
Yeah.
It's in their front four, but then it's also on offense. And that's going to be, it kind of goes back to the wide receiver thing, is how good will they be? Can they run with some of those more athletic teams? That's going to be a big, big question mark for BYU this season.
Normally when we do position previews, normally when we do opponent previews, we like to give a prediction for how we believe the team is going to pan out this year, and then obviously give a prediction for the actual matchup with Notre Dame. And so when I look at BYU this year, I look at FanDuel, and they have an over-under win total of 8.5. I am very confident in taking the over in 8.5 wins. I think BYU will, at the minimum, be a 9-win team. One of the cool things about talking about Kalani Sitake and BYU is, like, over the last couple of seasons, they haven't really dropped one of those games. It's like, what the heck was that? It's just when they've faced a better team, they've just lost to those teams. I don't really have a concern about BYU. Like, how the heck did you lose that game to Cincinnati at the end of the
Because they find ways to win those games. Yep. That's why. It's like they've had like a game a year where it's like, dude, what was that about? But they found ways to win most of those. The only one that I look back and say, oh God, they did that and lost, was the Kansas game at home 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But like last year, the games that they lost to Texas Tech, but like they struggled against Colorado, struggled mightily, but found a way to win. Struggled against Arizona, came back late, won the game, I think in overtime. Struggled with Utah a little bit, which was a really good team, and they found ways to win. Struggled early against Cincinnati and UCF, and then rolled those teams in the second half. That's the thing, is they're able to kind of overcome those moments where they're not playing their best, and that's the mark of a good team, is when you can not play well, not bring your A game or even your B game, and still win conference games. That's when your programs are going to play. So I think that, more than anything, is why I do think BYU is legit. Like, it's because they're not out there like getting these fluky, everything went their way, and that's the only reason they beat this good team. I mean, they're winning games sometimes in conference playing their C game. And when you can do that with a true freshman quarterback, you can miss me with the whole smoke and mirrors talk about BYU. No, that they're a good football team. And if you're going to beat them, you're going to have to beat them. They're not going to beat themselves. You're going to have to actually outplay them, out-hit them, out-execute them, and all those type of things. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's going to be a 4-quarter fight against BYU, Trev. I mean, that's the reality of it. Even the Texas Tech game, that was still a physical game in the fourth quarter. BYU just couldn't do anything on offense, but they were fighting. They were hitting. that first game should have been 40-something to 7. I mean, Texas Tech was moving the ball, but then they just would kind of make that play they needed to make to hold them to a field goal, and they're off. Eventually, they just kind of crumbled at the end because their offense in that game. But their team, you got to bring it for 4 quarters if you're going to beat BYU. And to your point about the schedule, like worst case scenario, they lose to Notre Dame and then lose 3 of 4 to Arizona, TCU, Arizona State, and Utah, or 2 of those games, and then get upset by somebody else. I just don't see it because this is a team that, to your point, they haven't really gotten upset much the last couple of years. And so I think that 9-3 is kind of worst case. I'm with you. I think that's worst case scenario for me. That means you lose at home to Notre Dame, and then you also lose 2 of 3 at TCU, at Utah, and at Kansas. But there's some other, at UCF, I think it's going to be a little tougher game this year than it was last year. We'll see. Arizona at home won't be an easy game. And here's the thing about Arizona. Arizona now knows they can beat BYU because they took BYU to overtime last year. They're going to look at that game and say, we should have won that game. We had the lead in that game. We let BYU get back in that game. Wasn't the other way around where BYU was up big, Arizona battled back. I thought Arizona was going to win that game. They outplayed BYU in that game and then just kind of let it go a little bit at the end. So they're going to have confidence they can beat BYU. Now, will they? I don't predict it, but that to me, that game right there, Trev, is maybe the second biggest game of the season for them, in that if they lose that game, now all of a sudden they're in desperation mode, and they still have at TCU, Notre Dame, at UCF, home against Arizona State, at Utah, at Kansas. And, oh, by the way, they got to play DJ Lagway this year. Now, all of a sudden, okay, now you start pressing. Now you start making those mistakes, and that's when things fall apart. You win that Arizona game, I think that helps them build a lot of confidence because you got Colorado State the next week, and then a bye, then you get TCU on the road. And I think that's when you're like, okay, 10-2, 9-3 at worst. That's where BYU is going to be. What's your actual record prediction, Trev? Did you say? I'm going 10-2 is my record prediction.
Yep, I'm also going 10-2. I have
and then they are in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah,
but Notre Dame and who else? I'm sorry, Trev.
I have them losing to Notre Dame and Arizona State. I'm high on the Sun Devils this year.
Me too. I have I think I have Notre Dame. I'm 10-2. I didn't pick their second loss. It's zeroed into one of 2 games. It's going to be Arizona State at home or Utah on the road. It's going to be one of those 2. I think they beat TCU at home, although that's another game that's like if they go 9-3, that's the first game I look at and say they're going to lose that one. Unless they lose both to Utah and Arizona State. Yeah. But there's some potential trap games on there as well. I think that Kansas game could be very interesting, depending on if they can get something at quarterback. But you got Andy Kotelnicki back with Kansas, and him and Lance Leipold back together. They got Dylan Edwards out of the portal, who's a dynamic player. So there's some interesting games on there. But I'm with you. I'm 10-2, and I got the Cougars playing in the Big 12 championship. They could go 9-3 and play in the Big 12 championship because we've seen a lot of 2-loss. Big 12 teams make it. Last year we didn't see that, but in the past that hasn't been abnormal to see that.
Do you have a prediction for how the Notre Dame game is going to go with them?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a battle for 4 quarters, but I think it's one where Notre Dame pulls ahead away late. I have Notre Dame winning 27-17. I just think BYU is going to struggle to consistently move the ball on Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's going to maybe early in the game I think it's going to be like a game like that, or I think it's not close. If they have trouble holding Notre Dame's offense in check, then I think Notre Dame could run away with that one, and that gets BYU out of being able to run the ball and things like that. They got to try to throw. They fall behind. I think BYU is going to play well enough in the trenches, and it's going to be a test for Notre Dame that's something like they have not seen all season. That's another part of it, is like this is going to be a different environment on the road, in the mountains, best team you've played so far. I just think Notre Dame's going to sputter a little bit early. And then second half, it's like, okay, they're clearly the better team. So I have Notre Dame winning 27-17. What say you, Trevor?
I have Notre Dame winning 31-20, and I have Notre Dame scoring last. It's going to be one of those games where I think it's going to be closer. There are some elements to your point in this game that Notre Dame just won't have faced. BYU is by far their hardest road game of the year because it's not going to be North Carolina. It's not going to be Purdue. I don't see it being Navy.
No boiler up. Come on, man.
No, definitely not. But
sorry.
No, you're good. But
sorry, Purdue fans. Your program's not good.
Yeah. No. The last time they played them on the road was actually very favorable for Notre Dame. But this is going to be by far the hardest road game of their regular season schedule. And when you factor in the athletic differential between these teams, I think the top level athletes, you give the advantage to Notre Dame. We're also factoring in that BYU is now going to be without their defensive coordinator. Jay Hill is now over at Michigan. And so I think that's going to be a factor as well. So, yeah, I think it's going to be close because, again, Notre Dame is going to have to go out and beat a very fundamentally sound, well-coached, hard-nosed football team.
Physical, yeah.
Yes, very physical football team. And I think that is going to be a little bit of a culture shock to the team overall. Like, there's going to be some individual matchups that they'll face along the way, to give them a taste, somewhat of a taste of like, okay, like against Wisconsin in the season opener, that's a ground and pound team with a mobile quarterback, so there'll be some light tests, but everything factored in with the environment, I think it's going to be tough. But I have Notre Dame winning 31-20 and scoring last.
I agree.
Brian, it is time to rank the top 10 offensive lines in college football here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Like we do with a lot of these rankings, what we're going to do today, this is more of a projection going forward. It's not who are the top 10 offensive lines going into the fall. It's how do we see it playing out over the course of the season? And this is a topic that definitely requires some projection. This is one that it's especially with you got portal players coming back from injury, young players stepping up into big roles.
Look at the NFL draft last year. A ton of guys taken from the offensive line in the first 2 rounds.
Oh, yeah. We came up with a top 10 list, but man, I'd looked at 25 different teams across all Power 4 conferences. And we had
and when Trevor says that, it's not like we pick 25 teams to look at. It's we go through the list and we kind of break down their alignments, and then we'll put a team in I'm going to look deeper into this team. They've gotten past my initial glance, and so it's like it's from looking at all the teams, then it whittles down, and usually it's like 15 or so. Like Trev's list of 25 was actually about where mine was. I think I had maybe a couple more, but it's a deep list for good and bad reasons. Good reasons because there's a lot of potentially good offensive lines, but also more because there's not a lot of certainty over who's going to be good and not on the offensive line as well. I think that's a factor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you start talking about the potential of Notre Dame's offensive line with guys like Will Black stepping in, Gerby Lambert and Anthony Knapp changing new positions, or like a Miami offensive line with guys like Jackson Cantwell and Samson Okunlola, stepping into much bigger roles this year, the level for variance and some of the most veteran returning offensive lines were just a window in where I had some of my difficulties. You guys know me. I'm Mr. I got to see it. I put a lot of value into returning offensive lines, and some of the most veteran and experienced offensive lines in the country aren't in my top 10 because I watch them and I'm just like you're there, but is there another level you can get to? I don't know. And that's what was interesting about this ranking.
Sometimes being experienced can make me not love your offensive line coming back because it's like, this group's been together for 2 years and you still haven't been good. What's going to make it change now?
Yep.
And there's one team that's in my top 10 that's a story of, and so it's like, okay, maybe I don't have them as high as some other people have them, but this is why. And so, but there's also potentially a lot of good offensive lines also if things pan out. There's 3 or 4 SEC offensive lines. I'm like, I can't put them in the top 10 right now because they're almost all rebuilt through the portal. But there's some teams I got my eye on. The ACC has some decent offensive lines this year. That's something that surprised me, Trev, when I was going through the projections. I was like, I'm gonna fly through the ACC. I'm gonna have Miami, SMU, and then nobody else. And I was like, man, Virginia's got 4 guys coming back. Plus Monroe Mills comes back, who was hurt last year. Like, boy, their offensive line might be good. And then there's some other teams. I'm like, boy, Louisville's got some really good transfers coming in. They got to, come together, but they might have a shot to have a pretty good offensive line. And so I was surprised at how many good offensive lines there were potentially in the ACC. That's something that stuck out to me as well. Clemson might have a sneaky, decent offensive line this year. They lost some NFL guys that I just never thought lived up to their potential, especially not so much Blake Miller, but the other two. So it's going to be a fun year. If you're someone who likes line play, this is going to be a very fun year to talk line play.
Without a doubt. When we go through these rankings, we're going to do what we normally do. We're going to work 10 to 6. And then I will list my 10. Brian will list his 10, and then we'll kind of have a conversation about it.
We'll go 10 to 6 and then talk, and then 5 to 1 and talk, just so we're clear.
Yep, so. Absolutely. I'll get us kicked off here with my number 10 unit, and that is the Michigan Wolverines. Number 9 on my list, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. 8, I have the USC Trojans. 7, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And at number 6, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes.
It's a good list, Trev. Mine is I have the Texas Tech Red Raiders at 10. I have the SMU Mustangs at 9, USC Trojans at 8. So that's one we have similar. Buckeyes at number 7, also similar. And then I have the Missouri Tigers, very underrated offensive line in the SEC this year. They have 4 starters coming back. That's another one that I have. That's my 10 through 6. So let's just talk about this group first, Trev. Obviously, we have a couple that are similar. We both have Texas Tech. You have Texas Tech a little higher than I do, but we both have them in there. We have USC in the same spot. We both have USC at 8. And then we're only a spot off on Ohio State. I have them at 7. You have them at 6. So let's talk about the 3 teams we have in common first real quick, Trev. Texas Tech is a team that I think their offensive line did not get enough credit for their success last year.
Agreed.
They were very good running the football last year, partly because they have good backs. But the other part of that is their backs had the way paid for them pretty well from their offensive line. And when I look at this Texas Tech team, I think 3 of their 4 best linemen from last year are back. And they signed a 5-star look, put it this way, Texas Tech has a 5-star offensive lineman coming in, and he is not projected to start right now. When would that have been the case at Texas Tech, right? I mean, so I really like this offensive line. I really like Howard Sampson at left tackle. I think he's a really good player. Sheridan Wilson at center is a really good player. I like this Texas Tech offensive line. Why do you have them a little higher, Trev? So because you're clearly higher on them even than I am.
Yep. So part of it projecting out over the course of the season with everything when Will Hammond stepping into the quarterback position, they're going to need this group to elevate as well. I love the outlook of their running back room. When you talk about, I mean, you mentioned some of the guys, Cameron Dickey comes back, Jacoby Williams comes back, and now Quentin Joyner is now healthy. I think their success in the run game last year, although it was not highlighted in 2025, I think will be in 2026. You return experience at the tackles. I think Hunter Zambrano comes back. I think your center also comes back. So I really like Texas Tech's offensive line, and I think they're going to get propped up a little bit as well by playing like somewhat of a Big 12 schedule. We talked about some of the defensive lines in the Big 12 aren't across the board all that deep. I think Texas Tech is going to have a good year this year in the trenches.
Another team that we have both in there, and it's the one team we have in the same spot, and that's USC. This is actually a team that I'm very intrigued by. I am projecting a lot here with this line because USC's offensive line last year was solid. It wasn't a top 10 offensive line, but everybody comes back. They're all 5 starters come back. And then Elijah Page, who was kind of banged up last year, only played a little over half the year last season. He comes back as well, and he should be healthy. A lot of this is projection of what I think guys are going to do in sort of their second year together. I think I put a lot into the continuity of the group. I think the left side of the line, if Elijah Page can stay healthy, could be very good with him and Tobias Raymond. They're big and physical on the right side. They were a pretty good run blocking offensive line last year, even with all the injuries. Where my projection is mostly with USC is pass pro. They weren't great in pass pro last year. That's an area they've got to improve a ton. I think Elijah Page being healthy helps there because he's a much better pass protector, in my opinion, than Tobias Raymond is at left tackle. Well, unfortunately, last year, because of sort of the injuries to Elijah Page, we needed to see him more last season in pass pro, and I think this year we'll see him more. I mean, 5-6 games last year, Tobias Raymond was your starting left tackle. He's not a great left tackle. He's just okay left tackle. I think he's a really good guard. And so if Elijah Page stays healthy, now all of a sudden, we're talking about a guy that's got a chance to be a much better player. And if you look at his pass protection numbers last year, Trev, they weren't great. He gave up 25 pressures last season. But when you look at it, a lot of that had to do with his time at tackle. First 4 games, he's playing guard. Actually, when did he move to tackle? It would be for the Michigan game. So if you look at the first 5 games he played in, He only gave up 3 pressures in the first 5 games. And then he moves to tackle for, let's see here. He played tackle against Michigan and Notre Dame, gives up 1 pressure against Michigan, 5 against Notre Dame. And then at Nebraska, he moves back into guard against Nebraska and Northwestern. He struggled a little bit against Nebraska with that back and forth. Was good against Northwestern. Then he moves back out to tackle and gives up more pressures, including 5 in the last game of the year. It's much better in pass pro inside a guard than he was a tackle. And that's a factor for me as well. But continuity matters. And let's talk about the Buckeyes, because that's the one team for me that I've seen people rank higher than that. And that is one where they bring a lot back. They bring back 4 guys that started last year: Austin Saraveld, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, and then Phillip Daniels started at times last year. You've got Ian Moore as a guy that's battling to kind of get into the starting lineup for them. Saraveld's a guy that's getting a lot of preseason love as a potential All-American caliber player. I've got no problem with that at all. Potential all Big Ten candidates. But here's my concern about Ohio State. They are bringing back a lot from a line that was just kind of solid last year, and guys that played a lot the year before. Phillip Daniels started in the Big Ten the year before. Saraveld and Hinsman and Montgomery all had starts the year before. They were starters in the playoffs for them. I thought they blocked better then than they did this year.
Yeah.
Can they take a jump this year? Like that's I don't like making projections for teams that have a lot of guys going into their 3rd year making these massive jumps. And so that's kind of a question. Like, how much better will they be? Now, I've also felt at Notre Dame, we've seen where 3rd year is when guys make jumps, but you saw more of it before. I mean, you saw Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey have All-American moments in 2016, and then in 2017 they became stars, and I just didn't see as much of that. I saw steadiness, solid play, but I didn't see dominance, which is why I think they struggled against Indiana and struggled against Miami and struggled against Texas. Like the 3 teams that they played that actually had good defenses, they struggled in. So how much better are they going to get? That's a question I have. I do think they're going to be better. It's just I'm not projecting the big jump that some people made. I think Ohio State's offensive line feasted on bad teams last year. And that's where I kind of wonder how good they're going to be this year. But how good means 7 instead of 3. I still think they're a top 10 offensive line. I think the only debate is, are they 6, are they 7, are they 10? I'm comfortable with them in the bottom half, but it's do they have the ability to rise beyond that? That's what I have a question about, because of how much experience comes back from the group. Like, how much better can they actually get?
That's why I have Ohio State at 6. We have a lot of similar thoughts about them. I think they are who they are, and who that is in the middle of the pack of being a top 10 offensive line. Mm-hmm. You have guys in this unit like Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery and Austin Saraveld, who I believe played in the national championship game against Notre Dame back in 2024. I know for a fact Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery did. I don't remember if Austin Saraveld did. But
if Austin Saraveld did what? Played in the playoffs?
Played in the national championship game against Notre Dame.
I believe he did.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I have to go back and look, but I thought
I'm 100% sure that Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery did. I was not positive about Austin Saraveld.
I think they were rotating. I think Luke and Austin, I'm looking it up, but I thought they were in like a rotation where they both played.
Gotcha.
At guard. But yeah, continue. I'm going to look that up for you.
Jeez, Archer, the one show that you're not in here. I know, right? We have questions about Ohio State.
Freaking slacker.
Jeez, guy. No, but when I look at Ohio State, my question was, is this just their ceiling? Will they get any better than 6? How is their outlook? Is there another level for them talent-wise to get up to? I don't know the answer to those. They found their home for me on this list at number 6 overall. I echo a lot of the same things that Brian said about them being at number 7.
They did both play. He was actually rotating with the kid that left to go to Kentucky.
Oh, Tegra Shabola?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So, because Fryer played 64 snaps, Donovan Jackson played 64, Luke Montgomery played 64, Carson Hinsman played 64, and then Austin played 27, and Shabola played 37. So they all played. I knew that he was in a rotation. I thought it was for some reason I thought it was with Luke Montgomery, but I was incorrect. All right, you ready to get into the next group, Trevor? Did you want to have some conversations about Georgia? I was going to kind of maybe.
Yeah, I was about to ask if you had any questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So As far as Missouri, I know you're higher on them than what I am. They're in my honorable mention. They're in your, 6 through 10.
Yeah.
What did you see from Missouri that you really liked?
Well, number one, they bring back four starters, and they bring back an All-American caliber player in Caden Green, who's got a chance to be one of the better tackles in college football this year. And when you look at the success that Ahmed Hardy had last year, good chunk of that was their offensive line was pretty darn good run blocking. And I think some of the issues they had at quarterback masked, I think, how good I think their offensive line actually was last season, because they didn't really have a legit throwing threat to take the pressure off of their run game. I mean, they averaged 6.8 yards per pass attempt last year, 15 touchdowns and 11 picks. That's not because of their offensive line. With that production, they still averaged 228.3 rushing yards per game. Ahmad Hardy had 1,649 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6.4 yards per carry. But Jamal Roberts, their number 2, had 753 yards rushing, 6.1 yards per carry, and 6 touchdowns. And when a team has a second back that's that productive, either A, they have a very talented second back, which they do, or B, they have a very good offensive line, or C, it's a combination of both. And I think it was a little bit of a combination of both. Now, this year, they're going to have to play better in some of the bigger games. They had a couple down games last year. They didn't run the ball great against Oklahoma. Got shut down by Oklahoma, actually. Didn't run the ball well against Vanderbilt, but they also ran the ball very well in other games. They ran for 261 against Kansas, 285 against South Carolina, 163, but 5.8 yards per carry against Alabama. They ran for $170 on the road against Vanderbilt. They ran for 207 against Texas A&M. They ran for 326 against Mississippi State. And then 159 in the bowl game against Virginia, 5 yards a carry. So even with very little passing threat last year, they were able to have one of the better run games in the country. And I think the offensive line was a big reason for that. I actually thought about having them higher, but I wonder if they have enough star power outside of Caden Green to be higher. But for me, this is the floor for Missouri on the offensive line. And they got a portal pickup that's going to be their new starter this year. I think it's a good player. I really like Missouri. I think Georgia gets a lot of talk. I know you'll talk about Georgia, but I really like this Missouri offensive line. This is an outstanding offensive line. Trev, you had Georgia in your top 10. I do not. Full disclosure, they're not going to sneak into my top 5. What'd you like about the Bulldogs, other than they're going to be freaking huge on the offensive line this year?
Well, that's
like
it.
6'9" right tackle right there.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's it. So we just go into the top 5. Yeah. No, so I feel very similar to Georgia's offensive line as I do about Gunnar Stockton, because Gunnar Stockton was also my number 10 overall quarterback when we ranked the top 10 quarterbacks in college football. I think they are who they are. I think my biggest issue for not having them any higher than what they are is they lack consistency, which I don't love when you return some veterans like Ernest Green and Dontrell Glover, Drew Bobo. Those are all guys, Juan Gaston. Those are all guys that are going into their multiple years of starting. The thing with Georgia's offensive line is when they're on and they're gelling as a unit, they're able to move the ball very, very consistently. There's a reason why they put up 35 points on Texas. It wasn't in spite of their offensive line. But in that same vein, they've also struggled at times because of their offensive line not being able to keep Gunnar Stockton's jersey clean. So I have them at 10. I'll talk a little bit more about Georgia kind of when we get to some other superlatives that we're going to talk about. But very much how I talked about Ohio State, where I believe that I ranked them at their ceiling. I also ranked Georgia at their ceiling, and that was at 9th. So
yeah, they're going to really need Ernest Green to be better at left tackle than he was 2 years ago at left tackle. That's a big one for me. And the other thing, I just didn't think they were that great last year. And they were solid, but I think the thing I'll say about Georgia, which made it tougher for me to leave them out, was I do think they're a little bit more talented this year than they were last year. And obviously Juan Gaston's going to be a year older. He's going to have a little bit more experience. At right tackle, you got the Helton kid who's a freshman. Dontrell Glover was a true freshman last year. So Ernest Green's talented. It's just, can he play left tackle? That's really my big question mark. And that's the thing that honestly kind of held me back from putting Georgia in there, is just because of, I didn't think they were a great offensive line last year. They didn't give up a lot of pressures last year. They didn't give up a lot of sacks last year. They're actually pretty good in that regard. But the other thing is will they be that good in some of the, like Juan Gaston gave up 13 pressures last year, but he only had 254 pass blocks, but he was a redshirt freshman. I expect him to be better. Ernest Green was really good last year when he was able to play right tackle, but he really struggled the year before when he played left tackle. But there's a lot of talent there at the tackle spot. I don't know. Interior's young, and that's a little bit of a concern and a question mark for me. But they're evidence of how good the potential offensive lines are going to be this year, because I think this will be their best offensive line since 2022. That I will say. Just will it be top 10? We'll see.
Sure.
We'll see. Let's go on to our next 5, Trev.
So my 5-1, I have Tennessee at 5, Iowa at 4, Texas at 3, Notre Dame at 2, and Indiana at 1.
Now, this one we had the same 5, not in the same order, but we had the same top 5. I have Iowa at 5, Tennessee at 4, Texas at 3, Notre Dame at 2, Indiana at 1. So 6 to 10, some variation, not just of teams, but also where we rank them. We have the same 1, 2, and 3, same order, same teams, and then we just flip 4 and 5. So let's get into this one, Trev. Let's talk about your top 5 and Tennessee, Iowa, Texas, Notre Dame, Indiana. Let's start with I want to start with the Hawkeyes, Trev, and let's talk about them a little bit, because they were probably arguably the best offensive line in college football last year. They won the Joe Moore Award, didn't they, last year?
Yes.
Didn't Iowa win the Joe Moore Award? Lost 3 starters. Jennings Dunker is gone. Their center was an all Big Ten guy. It was actually an All-American last year. So how are you going to have that team? Is it just the Kirk Ferentz hype? Well, no, it's not just that, but that's obviously part of it. Ever since his son is relieved of offensive line duties, I think their offensive line has kind of gotten back to being what you expect the Iowa offensive line to look like. But I think they have big-time talent, So, yes, they lost Dunker, but Trevor Lauk is one of the better returning left tackles in all of college football. So he's a really talented player, big guy too, 6'5", long, 310. He's a guy getting first-round NFL draft pick talent. Cade Piper coming back is going to be at center this year. He's a good player. Guy that I really like is Jack Dotzler at right tackle. Now he's struggled to get into the lineup because of how good Lauk and Dunker were, but he's a really athletic kid that I think is poised for a breakout year. I always joke that there's that kid that no one ever heard of coming out of high school that doesn't step into the lineup at Iowa to like his redshirt junior year, and you're like, who's this guy that's making all Big Ten? That's Jack Dotzler to me. And so I think and the thing I like too is like Cade Piper, Leighton Jones, those are guys that are stepping into to maybe more prominent roles or being tasked to do more, but they've played. They're not portal guys. They're guys that have come up in the system, which to me means I'm more confident they're going to be able to gel really quickly. And I think this team just keeps rocking and rolling. As far as offensive line, I think this is going to be an elite offensive line this year.
Yeah, I think so too. I echo a lot of the same things that you said. I mean, and even a guy like Jack Dotzler was able to play 140 snaps of offense last year, despite them being a Joe Moore award-winning unit. I love Trevor Lauk. Awesome name. Shout out to you. But
the Lauk part is really awesome, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. Well played, sir. But yes.
Lauk is a sweet last name. You're correct.
It is. That's what I was talking about. I'm not the biggest fan of the first name. But when I look at Iowa, yes, their proven track record of always being stout in the trenches. But one of the things that I like to see in offensive lines is when you're really stout in really 3 key areas: left tackle, right tackle, and center.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Iowa is absolutely going to have that. You combine that with their track record, I think they're going to be a top 5 offensive line in college football this year.
Now, you had Tennessee 5, Iowa 4. I had Iowa 5, Tennessee 4. And here's what separated it for me. Tennessee has more coming back. And I think Tennessee, will David Sanders be as good as Trevor Lauk this year? I don't know. I'm not predicting it, but it wouldn't shock me either. I mean, he was pretty darn good last year as a true freshman. I believe he was at right tackle. He moves over to left tackle this year. They went out and got Ori Williams from the portal, but the Sam Pendleton comes back. Wendell Moe comes back. I think Sam's going to be even better this year, his second year playing center. Wendell Moe is probably one of the 10 to 12 best guards in college football coming back this year. And then David Sanders was a pretty darn good freshman last year for Tennessee. And when I say freshman, he was a true freshman, 5-star player, true freshman. I didn't know he'd be able to get on the field as a true freshman because he was like 260 pounds when he signed. And he comes in last year and he starts 9 games, got a little, steps into the starting lineup and not till kind of later in the season, but still played 257 snaps. Gave up 17 pressures, which you'd expect from a freshman, but just got better every week, Trev. And a guy that I think is poised to have a bit of a breakout season. I think next year's probably the season where he has the true breakout to becoming like first team All-American. I think we're probably still a year away from that, but I think he could potentially be like a second team All-SEC guy this year. And, Wendell Moe is going to be in the conversation for, first team All-American, second team All-American kind of player. Sam Pendleton's a tough, gritty kid that helps run the football. We've said this a lot this offseason, Trev, where I am very curious to see how good Tennessee's going to be because I have questions about their quarterback. But what we both said is if they get quarterback figured out, this Tennessee team could be pretty good. And I think they went through some growing pains last year having to replace 4 starters. Well, this year, that means they've got 4 starters coming back. And I think that's why I'm very high on this Tennessee offensive line this season. Very high. Losing Lance hurts, but I really like what they've got coming back this season. Really like what they got coming back. And, look at Jesse Perry in the starting lineup. He played a lot of tackle last year. He gets to move inside the guard because of the David Sanders kind of getting thrust more into the lineup. And I think that's going to be something that's going to help him out quite a bit as well. I really like this Tennessee offensive line this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I echo a lot of the things that you said. The separating factor for me, because the only difference that we have in our top 5 is I have Iowa 4, you have Iowa 5, and then you have Tennessee 4, I have Tennessee 5.
It's just the amount of experience coming back. That's it. It's the separator for me.
It was very close. The separator for me, and I'm very high on Tennessee's offensive line. It's why I ranked them in the top 5. They have better odds on FanDuel to win the SEC title than Missouri and Auburn. And so there's a lot to like about this Tennessee offensive line. The separator for me was I've seen as a program level a little bit more consistency from an Iowa offensive line than that of the Tennessee offensive line. Now, having said that, the reason why Iowa is still in my top 5 or why Tennessee's still in my top 5 is I think they have one of the top ceilings of any of these groups, honestly. So a lot of people can get almost turned off by the fact that Tennessee ranked 50, I think it was like 54th in the country last year in sacks allowed, but it's because of the youth of the offensive line of last year. Those guys all come back. I'm projecting them forward. I'm a big fan of what they got bringing.
Those growing pains are going to help them quite a bit.
Without a doubt. Yes, sir. I'm with you completely.
So, Trev, let's talk about the 3-2-1. Texas was the hardest one of the top 5 to project because there's this huge difference between what they were on the field last year and what they could potentially be. And at times last year, you're like, what is this team on the offensive line? You get this great reputation as like, oh, you've got this, one of the best offensive line coaches in the game. With all due respect, he hasn't really coached like it. Even a couple years ago with Kelvin Banks, you watched their offensive line play the year that they go to the semifinals. You're like, their line is good, but it's not as good as it should be. And that's just kind of been the story I've had with Texas really for years. Is like, yeah, they're good, but they're not as good as they could be and should be. Well, now you go into 2026. Trevor Gooseby comes back. He's going into his second full year as a starter. He started a couple games, I believe, in 2024. But he's a guy that people talk about as a potential top 10 NFL draft pick, 6'7", 315 pounds, long arms, good athlete. He's going into his third year in rotation. I think you're going to see that jump from him because it's his second full year in the starting lineup. Brandon Baker's a talented kid, Trev. And I feel like with Brandon Baker, he's their Anthony Knapp in that he's a talented kid, built similarly, 6'4", 308, good arm length, powerful kid, just not good in space. He's just not comfortable in space. He doesn't lack the athleticism to play tackle. He doesn't look comfortable playing tackle. Well, now they're kicking him into right guard. They went out and got Amarian Harris from Arkansas, who was about the only good offensive lineman they had last year outside of Francisco Carmona. And I think that's going to make Brandon Baker a much better player. Now that right side looks really good. And you look at the rest of their starting lineup at left guard, they went and got Lawrence Seymour from Western Kentucky, really good football player. Connor Robertson's played a lot of football, and they've got solid depth. That's the other thing. I don't know if they have like Notre Dame depth. That was one of the things that separated those two teams, but they've got good depth. This team should. I said Amarian Harris. That's not they didn't get him. Sorry, they got Melvin Ziani, the kid from Wake Forest, who's a really good player. Amarian Harris went. Where did he go? He went to another SEC team. But I like him at right tackle. Really good player from the ACC. I just like this offensive line. It's like even if Kyle Flood just does a good coaching job this year, this should be a top 5 offensive line. but it's projecting because they didn't play anything like it last year. But it's kind of like what we say about Notre Dame. You didn't always have the right guys in the right spots last year. Trevor Gooseby was his first full year as a starter last year. What do you expect from him now in year 2 as a full-time starter? I think he's going to be a stud. And then you get Siani. I think you're solid at tackle. Now Brandon Baker moves inside where he's going to be better. I just project this offensive line to take a big jump this year. I do. I think the talent is there. Just got to coach it up.
They have one of the highest ceilings in the country. And one of the things that I like is there's anchors of this offensive line to help fuel that conversation. You got Trevor Gooseby, Brandon Baker, echo everything that you said about Connor Robertson. It's just about, can you put it all together? Mm-hmm. Because there is a lot left to be desired with some previous Texas offensive lines of recent years, and specifically 24 and 25. But I'm with you. There is some room for variance with the Longhorns, but as of right now, very comfortable putting him in.
Yeah, and honestly, in some regards, I was not a big fan of Cole Hudson. You have a guard that is in his, he's had played 700 snaps coming in last year, gave up 20 pressures as an interior player. I was like, man, he was not good in my opinion. I thought he was going to be good, but he ended up just not being good. He played center first half of the year, then moved over to guard. I think that's one of those ones where the way he played last year was like, ugh. So I think they're going to be better there. And like when they moved Connor Robertson more full-time into the starting lineup, that's when the offense started playing better. Yeah. So I think, you say, oh, they lost this guy, but I don't know that that's going to necessarily be a loss. I think the kid they got from Western Kentucky from the portal is going to be better than he was. So I just think overall this is why they're going to be a better group. Let's talk Notre Dame at number 2, Trev. Similar thing. I think Notre Dame was better than Texas on the offensive line last year, but this is projecting. They were certainly not the number 2 offensive line last year. Couple of reasons why we think that they're going to be better. Number one, their 2 best linemen are now playing the position that they should be playing based on their talent. Anthony Knapp moving inside the guard, Gerby Lambert moving to tackle. I think that's 2 All-American caliber players. You look at it, you're putting a 5-star kid in Will Blacken at left tackle. That's kind of like I kind of expect sort of a Trevor Gooseby 2025 type of season from him. Loads of talent up and down. You're going to have some great moments and some moments where he's not as good.
Sure.
Sullivan Absher's got 6 starts under his belt at 5 starts under his belt at left guard. He moves over to right guard where he's always been a right-handed player in high school in his first couple years in Notre Dame. The key for them is going to be center Ashton Craig. Can he be healthy all year? And so I can't project that. But I think what we learned last year is that if he can't, I'm not as worried about that now as I was a year ago.
Sure.
Very nervous about if Ashton Craig goes down this year. That I don't know what's going to happen. No, I've never seen Joe Otting play a meaningful snap. Well, I watched Joe Otting start 6 football games last year, and Notre Dame went for over 300 yards rushing twice with Joe Otting as starting at center. They'll be fine if Joe Otting's a center. And then you've got Cam Herron, Sullivan Garvin. Like, that's a big piece to me. So I think Notre Dame's got a chance to be an elite offensive line talent-wise. They're going to be massive. This is going to be their biggest offensive line probably since 2017. And the other piece is, Trev, I don't know that anybody can match their depth.
Yeah.
That's a big thing for me with Notre Dame is the depth this offensive line has is outstanding. Now, some of those young, Styles Prescott's got to make a jump from what he was last year, but you've got Matty Augustine's improved. You've got Christopher Tarrick. You've got Peter Jones. We talk about the center depth. And then, oh, by the way, you've got some freshmen coming in. One guy was a top 10 national player, Grayson McHugh. You've got 2 kids coming in that were over 320 pounds, and Tyler Merritt, Ben Nichols. Sullivan Garvin had a great spring. I absolutely love the depth of this team. And so I think they're in a much better position even than they have in the past, where they'd lose guys and they were still solid at that position. Now you've got some opportunities where you lose a guy. Sullivan Absher goes down. Okay, you're throwing in Matty Augustine. You should still be able to maul people a little bit. And I think that's another reason why I give Notre Dame. I think from a depth standpoint, I don't know that there's a better team on this list than Notre Dame from a depth standpoint. Now they got to play like it because this is projection. Because if they play close like they were last year, they're a top 10 offensive line, but they're not 2.
The tail end of your explanation about putting Notre Dame at 2 is why I also have them at 2. It's very difficult for me in this ranking to talk about Notre Dame at 2 and then not including Indiana at 1. I think Notre Dame has better depth than Indiana on the offensive line, and I think their talent ceiling is higher than Indiana's. That does not mean I think Indiana's offensive line sucks, because I think that they're going to have a very, very, very good offensive line. That's why I both have them ranked number 1. But I don't know who their Gerby Lambert is going to be, and their Will Black, and their Anthony Knapp. And then in the depths, I don't know who their Grayson McHugh is going to be, and their Matty Augustine. And so you guys get the point. The reason why I put Notre Dame 2 and Indiana 1 is for what's on the sidelines. Joe Rudolph has had talent to work with before, too, and has not been able to get the most out of it. I have zero questions around the talent ceiling. I need to see Joe Rudolph put together a championship caliber offensive line. I watched Bob Bostad do that with less talent than what Notre Dame had.
Sure.
That right there is the separator for me and why I put Indiana 1 and Notre Dame 2.
I do think Indiana has talent. I don't think they have Notre Dame's talent, but Carter Smith is a projected first-round pick.
Yeah.
I think some of that is a little bit like, I feel like the guy's a fifth-year senior. If he was going to be a top 20 pick last year, I think he probably would go pro.
Sure.
But he's still a great college offensive lineman. I don't know that I see the same NFL projection, not at left tackle, that some people do, but he's a very good college player. Then there's a lot of experience coming back. You know, Bray Lynch and Drew Evans, I always get their names backwards. Those are two very experienced guys. Joe Bruner transfers in from Wisconsin, who I think was the second-team All-ACC player last year. Ada Demola Ajani, another guy that is he as experienced as the kid they had at right tackle last year? No. Is he more talented? Yeah, I think he is. But to your point, Trev, it's like I do think they have talent, but they have a coach that's proven he will get the most out of that talent. And that's the difference. I agree with you. That is the separator. I just think their talent is, and I'm not saying that you don't think they have good talent. I think they have really good talent. I don't think they have elite talent. I think they have really good talent with an elite coach. Like Bob Bostad is what people say Kyle Flood is, but he hasn't proven himself to be that.
Yeah.
Or what some Notre Dame fans think Joe Rudolph is, but he has not proven he can do that. I watched an offensive line that does not have Notre Dame's overall talent outplay Miami's defensive line. And I didn't watch Notre Dame's offensive line do that. I didn't watch Ohio State's offensive line do that. I did watch Indiana's offensive line do that. And with good players, but they're
with a player that left Notre Dame,
right? Because he couldn't start.
Coogan, yeah,
right. Because he couldn't start. Yeah, didn't start. Wasn't going to start in 25, and didn't start in 24 until injuries happened.
Yep.
So yeah, I absolutely that's the separator for me. I think Notre Dame at number 2 and Texas at number 3 both have more talent than Indiana, but if Bob Bostad it was either one of the schools, that school would be number 1 for me.
Yes, absolutely. And it'd kind of be an easy decision.
Yep.
I'm with you.
Yep.
Now,
big time.
We do have some superlatives to kind of hand out. Before we get to those, there is kind of it's like a different type of discussion because it's not like honorable mention or like a sleeper, but we wanted to talk about 2 of the service academy teams in Army and Navy because we talked about it before the show, Brian, and how can you possibly stack up Navy or Army's offensive line with like what we believe Ohio State's offensive line to be? But I am also under the belief that Navy and Army are set to have 2 really good offensive lines in 2026.
Well, they both went through a little bit of a changing of the guard last year, so to speak, especially Army. Army, I think, lost. Did they lose all 5 starters from the year before or just 4?
I think, I know 4
might have been just 4. But, they have 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen come back. And look, how do I put a team whose offensive line is 6'2", 300, 6'3", 305, 6 foot 315, 6'1", 300, and 6'4", 300 against Texas? And none of those guys are going to get drafted. So it's hard to put them in the rankings, but the reason, same thing, in the same, Navy's actually smaller than Army. But the problem is it's the way that they play. That's the difference. It's the way that they play. When you look at, they execute their jobs at a high level, and when those 2 teams have experienced offensive lines, they are hard to stop, and they will both have experienced offensive lines. And I believe, didn't Army win the Joe Moore Award 2 years ago?
Yeah, that's back when they had like legitimate size. Like
Yeah.
I remember they had an offensive tackle that was like 6'6", 320. Like he was like,
Mhm.
yes, I believe they did in
Yep.
24.
So I don't think are. They don't have guys that start at Notre Dame, Miami, Notre Dame, Oregon, Indiana, Texas, any of the top 10 teams. That's why we just couldn't justify putting them in the top 10. But when you talk about how they play together as a unit, they have a chance to be two of the 10 most effective offensive lines in college football this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm high on Navy this year, and Braxton Woodson was one of the quarterbacks I talked about that I was keeping my eye on when we went through that ranking
Mm-hmm.
show. A big reason why is because they returned 4 of their 5 starters on the
Yep.
offensive line.
Yep.
Big reason why.
Yep.
Let's dive into some of these superlatives here, Brian. Let's start off with the sleeper teams, kind of like that honorable mentionist type of category. Who is an offensive line or offensive lines that you could see vaulting themselves like into this conversation that people should be keeping an eye on?
Well, one for me, I mean, we kind of have two. Trev, I'll let you go first because you listed one. It's one of the two I have. Well, actually, I'll go first, but I'll just mention the other team. Washington's a team that I have my eye on. They have I think 4 starters coming back on the offensive line. They have a guard that's got a chance to be a All-American caliber player, certainly all Big Ten caliber player. And they got a true freshman coming in that might start a tackle for them, a kid named Cody Green. He was played at Mater Dei out in Santa Ana in Cali. Really talented player. I think on 3 of them as a 5-star. I think either them or 247. One of them had it as a 5-star last year. He might start this year. He had a really strong spring. There's a lot of buzz coming out of Washington. He's going to be there. And they were a pretty good offensive line last year. Not good enough to be top 10 because I think they struggled against the better teams on the schedule and they struggled away from home. But if they can kind of, figure it out in a couple things, I like the talent there. I like this experience coming back there. And then you throw in an elite talent in Cody Green, they have a shot to make that jump. They're just not there yet. Now, there's other teams I'd even put in ahead of them. So they weren't even in my top 13, 14, but they're that sleeper team that could kind of come out of nowhere and surprise some people this year, as could an ACC offensive line that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, man. Virginia is a team that I have my eye on this year, an offensive line that I have my eye on. Several returning starters along the offensive line. They're one of the few offensive lines in the country that aren't relying on any portal players to supplement their starting lineup. But when you start talking about Mikhail Boley, Noah Josie, Drake Metcalf, McClellan Thomas, and then Monroe Mills coming back, like there's a lot of talent here on this offensive line to work with. There's a reason why Virginia played for the ACC title last year. I firmly believe that. And they have some core pieces in the trenches coming back to have that. Now, very curious to see how their quarterback competition pans out, because if my memory serves me correctly, and it's been kind of shaky today, they're going a quarterback battle, if I'm remembering correctly. Isn't it between Bo Perbula and
Eli Holstein?
Mm-hmm. So, which is interesting because those are 2 quarterbacks with very different skill sets. So I think whoever wins the starting quarterback job will also kind of dictate the outlook of the offensive line a little bit, but they are a sleeper team for me for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you got 4 starters coming back, plus Monroe Mills is back from being healthy, and he's played a lot of football. I like that offensive line a lot. And it was a very underrated part of how good they were last year.
Yep.
That was a very good offensive line. That's one that I look back and say, boy, we should have probably put Virginia in there. Like, just for how good they were last year and what they got coming back. But end of the day, they would be the next team in for me. This team actually would be. And when I talk about them as a sleeper, it's more of just like nobody talks about them, really. And I think they could be sneaky good this year. Sneaky good.
Jumping back into our top 10s, who in your top 10 list, Brian, could you see rising the most?
So, there's a couple that I looked at, Trev, but when I kind of go through it and, who's most likely, there's several teams to me in the back of it that I think could be those risers. But I'm going to go with, I've got my list here real quick. Let me pull my list up. I think SMU's got a shot to be one. I think SMU's a team that, you got to transfer at tackle. You've got one new starter. I need to see Josh Bates take another jump this year. I really like Addison Nichols. I really like PJ Williams. I think they're easy all ACC players. I think Josh Bates is a solid player last year that I think can be a lot better. He's kind of that key for me. If Josh Bates can take that jump and the transfers can be as good as I think SMU thinks they're going to be this year, I think they could rise. I mean, and we talk about risers. It's got to be more than 3 spots, and I think they certainly have a chance to be that. The one question that I have is, where do they put guys at tackle? I think that's some of the uncertainty. P.J. Williams is a right tackle last year. Are they going to keep him a right tackle? Do they move him to left tackle? Depending on who you talk to, you get a different answer, or who you read, you get a different answer. Do they put Andrew Chamblee there at left tackle? He's a talented young guy, but very inconsistent, loads of talent. If they put him at right tackle and then put PJ to left tackle, I think that's the recipe for them to be a much better offensive line this year. If they just decide to leave PJ at right tackle and put Chamblee at left tackle, I don't know that I love that as much, because I don't want Kevin Jennings, who has had a bit of he can get rattled a little bit with a young, unproven but talented guy protecting his blind side. I want him to see the pressure coming to his face. So I think they're a team that could potentially be a big riser. Texas Tech could as well, because I don't think you having them 7 is not out of the realm of possibility. Those are the 2 that I think have the best chance to be 3+ jumpers. Missouri might be the other one, but I'm going to go with SMU for now. But because Missouri jumping would have to get them up to like 2. That's a little bit too high, but they might be one that could make a big jump this year.
Texas Tech is my team that I have selected to make a jump this season. I mean, they weren't talked about enough.
You already got them pretty high.
I have them at 7. I could see them inching their way inside of the top 5 if things go their way. I mean, look, I talked about when I put them at number 7, when we were breaking down the rankings initially, that I think that they're going to get highlighted a little bit more this year with Will Hammond stepping in at quarterback. But last year they didn't get the attention they deserved. They rushed for 2,500 yards as a football team. I mean, Cameron Dickey and Jacoby Williams were 2,000 yards combined for 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. But a lot of the attention to Texas Tech last year went to Baron Morton and Caleb Douglas and Reggie Virgil. But I like this year Howard Sampson coming back. I think is going to be one of the best tackles in the Big 12. Hunter Zambrano comes back. You have continuity at tackle with Jacob Ponton coming back as well. I'm a fan of Texas Tech's offensive line. That is one piece of this team that I think is going to shine, because I think they're going to be a little bit more run heavy this year than what they were in previous years.
Agree. Yeah, I agree. And they're loaded in the backfield, and they're going to need to, because they're going to, the quarterback issues are going to be a question mark for them. But yeah, it's I could see that. What about dropping out? Who's your team, or not dropping out? Who's the team that you think stays in the top 10, but could potentially be a team that drops 3-4 spots?
I actually have Ohio State. And here's my reason why.
Because you have them 6, so a +3 drop still has them in the top 10. Okay.
Yep. I have Ohio State, and here's why. My concern with them, like I said, for my reason for ranking them at 6 was they are who they are.
Mm-hmm.
There's a world where Ohio State maintains the same level of offensive line play, which is still that of a top 10 unit. It's just then other units pass them up. Like I have Texas Tech ranked behind them. What if there's going to be some teams that have the potential to jump in and really emphatically jump into the top 10 as the season goes on? And Ohio State just stays at that same level. When I say Ohio State, I could see them dropping. I view it more as other teams just pass them by, not they aren't playing as well as I thought they would have, if that makes sense. So that's how I see the Buckeyes.
I like that one. Mine's Texas, and it's simple. I thought about Iowa, just because we are projecting a lot about 3 new starters and all that kind of stuff. But I feel better about that one. Texas is the one that could be the bigger dropper, because they should be 3. They could be 1, but they could also kind of be just as inconsistent as they've been the last 2 years and not be worthy of a top 5 ranking and fall down to 6, 7, as well as some teams like Missouri being better. Georgia maybe having a breakout year with their offensive line. Teams like that, SMU, teams like that really jumping up. Oklahoma's an offensive line that I don't have in my top 10. They don't belong in the top 10, but could they maybe jump out and jump in? There's a lot of movement where it's not that they just didn't really jump the way you think. So they didn't play worse than they did last year, but they don't make the jump, and other teams just pass them. So Texas is the one that I think in that group has the most amount of potential fall while still staying in. So that would be mine. What about drop out, Trev? What's the one team that you think could have the best opportunity? I shouldn't even say best opportunity. Who's got the, could potentially fall out of your top 10?
Mine's Georgia. I have them at 9, and like I said, I view them very similar to how I view Gunnar Stockton. And I also talked at the time I could see Gunnar Stockton falling out of my top 10 just because other offensive lines continue to pass them up. I have a lot of concerns about Monroe Freeling going over to left tackle, or Ernest Green going over to left tackle for Georgia. We'll see if that pans out. They have some younger players who are going into their second year in the starting lineup. I don't know if that means they improve overall. Ideally, they do, but Georgia's that team for me that I see dropping out.
So mine, Trev, is USC, because as much as I like the talent and the potential, I still don't know how comfortable I am with USC's coaching and toughness up front, and injuries.
Sure.
Injuries have been a problem for them as well. So I could see USC dropping completely out. Plus, they're at the bottom end. I actually like this offensive line. I'm not predicting it, but I think they're the team that I look at in my top 10 and say they're the one that I could see definitely dropping. Like when I look at Texas Tech, SMU, I think I see potential risers, not teams that could fall out. USC is the one that I look at and say, boy, that one could come back to where not even that they could be everything we think they're going to be, and just SMU's better, Texas Tech is better, Georgia's better, Miami's better, Washington is better, Auburn. It could just be that too. But I also could see them not being as good as we think they could be and then dropping out. Let's talk about the team that you could see that's outside the top 10 that you could see performing maybe better than maybe not performing better. Because when we say jump in, it's not that these two teams sucked and this team falls in, but like we're talking about earning their way in. Even if everybody in the top 10 plays what we think, what's that team that can maybe exceed your expectations and jump into the top 10?
I got SMU, a team that you have ranked in your top 10. I like parts of SMU's offensive line. There's just some things that I got to see with, Dramod Odoms and then Andrew Chambly on the left side. But from Joshua Bates over to PJ Williams, I love the outlook of their offensive line. I think I had both Addison Nichols and Josh Bates on my all-opponent team. But when I look at the offensive line as a whole, I've said before, one of the biggest things that I value in a stout offensive line, especially when I'm ranking them, is the outlook at left tackle. I just don't know about SMU's left tackle situation right now.
Because we don't know if they're going to move PJ over or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they are a unit that I could absolutely see jumping into these rankings.
Yeah, I like that group. Mine is Miami. Here's why I just couldn't justify putting Miami in. That's a lot of turnover from last year. Yeah. A lot of turnover. You lost the number 10 overall draft pick. You lost your right guard. You lost your left tackle. You lost your center. Now, I understand that Samson Okunlola also played some starter snaps. I know that Matthew McCoy played starter snaps. I understand. I know Ryan Rodriguez has played. I get all that. But there's just too much uncertainty for me to put him in the top 10. You're probably going to have a true freshman playing left tackle. I don't know where Matthew McCoy is going to play, which isn't necessarily a negative, because I think Matthew McCoy could play a lot of places. He could play left tackle, right tackle, both guard spots. Like, that's a nice thing to have. The point is, I don't know who steps up to force him at a spot. You know what I mean? Like, does a tackle step up and force him into guard? Does a guard step up and force him into tackle? I think Samson Okunlola's got a shot to become a dude this year at guard. I think he could do for Miami what we've talked about Anthony Knapp doing at guard. We're like not getting a ton of love for All-American, but just has that monster because he was a 5-star coming to high school, and it was legit. And he showed flashes last year, but consistency is still an issue for him. So and can Ryan Rodriguez stay healthy? That's the reason he didn't start last year, is because he got hurt the year before. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, but they have an outstanding offensive line coach in Alex Maribel. The most unlikely offensive line coach I've ever seen. Have you ever seen Alex Maribel?
Yeah.
Like, he makes Lou Holtz look tall.
Yeah.
Like, he's not a very big guy, and he's real skinny, but he's a great offensive line coach. They have God-given talent. Jackson Cantwell is a legit 5-star. Samson Okunlola is a legit 5-star. The kid they got over from Georgia has some ability, the Merriweather kid. We'll see what he can do. Matthew McCoy is a good football player. I think Matthew McCoy is a draftable type of NFL player, in my opinion. So it's just going to come down to, who's it going to be? Miami fans say, well, here's who it's going to be. I'm like, oh, you sure about that? Because I just read 3 different depth charts from different people that cover Miami, and they were all different, literally all different. And so, no, you don't know who's going to be your starters this year. I've seen people have Jackson Cantwell at right tackle and Matthew McCoy at left tackle. I've seen it flipped. I've seen Matthew McCoy guard. So that was my thing, is I don't even know who's going to start for them necessarily. So I couldn't put him in, but if Alex Maribel can get it all figured out and if they can have good health, I think their schedule sets up nicely, a lot like Notre Dame's, where they've got a lot of winnable games until November. What, Clemson maybe being the toughest that Miami has? For all the talk about how soft Notre Dame's schedule is, Miami's schedule is softer than Notre Dame's. I mean, even if I granted that Notre Dame has a soft schedule, Miami's schedule is weaker than Notre Dame's. Their second toughest team is going to be what? Clemson, Wake, Duke. They play one preseason top 25 team, most likely. That'll be Notre Dame. And so you got Stanford, Florida A&M, Wake, Central Michigan, all before you play Clemson. Then you have a bye. Then Florida State and Pitt, North Carolina before you play Notre Dame. So they're going to start getting tested a little bit in October. You know, with Clemson, maybe Florida State, maybe Pitt, North Carolina. But in September, they're not going to get tested a whole lot, which is that's good for them, because that's going to give them time to say, you know, let's work through some of this new group playing together, where you can play poorly against Wake Forest or play poorly against Stanford or Florida A&M and Central Michigan and still win comfortably. And I think it's one of those things where, depending on how, if they can go into the fall, into the first game, knowing who their 5 is, or if it's 6, but you know, like Notre Dame did in 2017, where here's our 4 and we're going to rotate our right tackle, we're going to rotate our right guard, whatever, but you know what the lineup is going to be. And that lineup gets a full month of just play together. Take your ups and downs. You're going to let that run through against Central Michigan. Oh, that's a bummer, but it doesn't matter, because, you know, your running back Mark Fletcher makes the dude miss and runs for 30 yards anyway. Like, you're going to have some of that, and that's okay. That's why the schedule sets up nicely. You don't have Notre Dame and Texas A&M to start your season like Notre Dame did last year. They were trying to go through those ups and downs. And I think that's why I could see Miami, if they can figure it out, stay healthy, becoming a top 10 offensive line by the end of the year. I just can't put him there now. And, you know, so that's where I'm at with them. But would it shock me if Miami finishes in the top 10? No. But it's just too many moving parts right now. A bunch of guys coming together. Like, Notre Dame's got 5 guys in new spots, 4 guys in new spots, but it's all guys that have played. That's not necessarily the case for Miami, because they're going to have guys that have never really started significantly or haven't played a lot in the true freshmen. So that's why they're not in my top 10 right now, but they're a team that I look at and say, I could see them jumping in. Yeah. I want to name, go ahead, Trev. Who's your jump-in team? You already said it, SMU, right? Go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Miami, and just they also, in my opinion, have not earned the right, in my eyes, to have been that team that just produces top-level offensive lines every year. I think the 2025 season has given some Miami fans revisionist history about what their offensive line was like actually in 2024. I did not think their offensive line was great in 24, but I've seen a lot of
players, but as a unit, they weren't good.
Exactly. Like, I've seen a lot of Miami fans on Twitter like, oh, they'll find, like, it's a Mario Cristobal offensive line. It's like, he's put together one good line.
Like, one great line. Yeah. They were solid in 24, but there was times when Cam Ward was running for his life in 2024 as well.
Yeah. He has not earned the right to just be like, well, they're just going to be perennially a top 10 offensive line unit, regardless of how much movement, because of that reason.
Now, if they do jump in this year, I think now we can say, okay,
100%.
Look, he had to change the culture at Miami. They were a soft program when he showed up. They weren't really recruiting the talent there. You know, there was a lot of things going on, and it took them till year 4 to get that figured out. And then year 5, they go out and then look how good they were in year 5, despite losing. You know, you lose your right Arnez Cooper, you lose Francis Malinoa, you lose Markel Bell, you lose what was Brockermeyer's first name? James Brockermeyer, and you go out the next year and you're still good. Yeah. Then you can say, okay, now Miami's in reload mode, and now next year we might give them more of the benefit of the doubt. But right now, I think that's a great point, Trev. They got to show it to me right now, but I won't. Neither of us will be shocked if Miami jumps in at some point in time this season. There's a lot of portal teams that are literally restocking through the portal. There's one sleeper team I want to mention that I can't even consider putting in the top 10 right now, that I'm very curious to see how it shakes out, because they're a team that is pure portal, Trev. I mean, their offensive line is, I believe, is 5 portal guys to be projected. But if it pans out, I could see them being a sneaky good team, and that is Auburn. One of the things about Auburn is, their left tackle's a kid that they're bringing over from, actually, let me see here. Let me pull this up real quick. So their left tackle's a kid coming in from Michigan State, was a good football player last year. They bring in a guard from Miami. I don't know that he started. I mean, he played at they're bringing in center Cole Best from South Florida. He's a kid. So, you got that center in the middle. Your right guard, Cole Skinner's coming up from South Florida, 6'5", 325, by the way. And then your right tackle is a kid that's coming over from JMU. And by the way, you and I were talking about how good Oregon allegedly is. We watched at JMU put up over 500 yards of offense and 30 points against Oregon in the playoffs last year. Now, some of it came in the second half, but they had some offensive linemen. They had a couple players you're like, okay, that guy can play. And so, again, I can't put them in there right now, Trev, because I need to see that group come together. But that is a team that I am very much looking at and saying, how are you going to come together? Because here's the thing. They got a good quarterback, very dynamic quarterback, and they have one of the most underrated backfields in all of college football, led by Jeremiah Cobb. They got a couple portal players in there too. If that offensive line can gel together, they've got a chance to be really good this year, Trev, up front. And
that pick.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how they develop throughout the year.
Absolutely love that pick.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Brian, we have a daily mailbag to take us the rest of the way here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We would prefer the questions to be more geared towards the topics we discussed today. And believe me, there is no shortage of topics. We talked about top 10 offensive lines. We previewed Notre Dame's 7th regular season opponent, BYU. We also talked about some All-America candidates on offense and defense. To get a question in, you can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji prior to your submission. Lets us know to set that question aside, and super chats get bumped up to the top.
Yes, sir. And we do not have any super chats right now. So let's start off with Aiden Benami, who is very much a topical question as we just finished up breaking down the offensive line.
Is Carter Smith, the offensive tackle at Indiana, really that good? Is he overrated?
Now, he's very good. Now, I guess my answer would be what are we talking about here? Are we talking about offensive linemen in college, or are we talking about NFL prospect? Because as an NFL prospect, I do think he's a little bit overrated. I've seen people talk about him being a top 10 pick, and I don't see that. I don't know that his athleticism and power projects quite good enough to first round, at least to high first round pick. I think you saw that a little bit in the Miami game, where that was like the one game in the postseason he was playing like legit, like top 15 players. I mean, Oregon to a degree, but he played well against Miami, but he also had some snaps where he just couldn't handle Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor. There were some snaps like that. I think as a whole, the Miami offense or the Indiana offensive line did outplay the Miami defensive line. And one of the Miami fans got all sensitive about that. But what are we talking about with that Miami D line? Outplaying them is not running for 250 yards. It's we did what we needed to do to make the plays we needed to make to win the game. And in those clutch moments, we made the blocks and they didn't make the plays. That's what outplaying Miami is. Outplaying a team like Miami last year is not running for 250. That's not happening. But you also saw part of the reason the game was a little bit closer, because there were some snaps where their best player had trouble against Miami's edge players. And it's because he's just not that high-level athlete. And he's got good length, but I don't know that he's got like Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp type of length, Trevor Gooseby type of length. And so NFL draft prospect, there's some things you can pick apart. As a college football player, I just talked about the couple snaps he struggled against Miami. There's also a lot of good snaps where he beat the Miami ends, but it's with technique, it's with leverage, it's with intelligence, it's with toughness, it's things like that. As a college offensive lineman, he's not overrated at all. He is very good. Very good. You can be a very good college offensive lineman and not necessarily project to be a top 15 to 20 draft pick. Is he a day 2 pick for me? Yes. Yes, especially if he think maybe he can move inside the guard. But I would absolutely take him in day 2, even maybe sneak into the late round 1. I don't see top 15 draft pick, and I've seen people project him to be that, but he's still a really good football player and a really good college player and a proven college player as well.
Yeah, the truth is somewhere in between with Carter Smith, in my opinion. I do think he's that good at the college level. I echo everything that you said about him as an NFL prospect. Right now, I'm going and I'm looking on FanDuel to see where his odds are to be taken somewhere in the first round. And he has similar odds to actually Byron Brown to be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft this upcoming season on FanDuel. But I'm with you.
A lot of mock drafts have Carter Smith going in the top 10 to 15. A lot of mock drafts. Yep.
From Black Irish 864, if Ashton Craig is healthy and starts, is the offensive line going to be a Joe Moore Award contender?
It should be. Honestly, they should be a Joe Moore Award contender if he's not healthy. I mean, look, if Joe Otting just does what he did in the last 6 games of last year and everybody else is the player that they should be, Joe Otting proved last year that he's good enough to help them go out and be a Joe Moore Award winner. I mean, I don't think Joe Otting's talent is less than Pat Coogan's. I don't. I think it's quite comparable. So, you know, that's a fair – I mean, look, they went out against USC, and, I mean, that was actually his best game. I mean, they dominated USC, but they also ran for 329 against Syracuse and averaged 13.7 yards a carry. So they should be able to win a Joe Moore Award even if he isn't healthy. It's going to be even more likely, or at least I would say likely, the odds are better if he does stay healthy. But he is a very key part. But I think one of the things that makes me feel good about this Notre Dame team is I don't know that there's a single guy where if that guy goes down in the offensive line, they are screwed. And that was the case in recent seasons. They may not be as good, but you're still going to be pretty good. So no, I think center's one that I feel most confident they can survive because of Ashton's injuries in the past. We had to learn that firsthand last year. We saw that firsthand. You know, Joe can come in there and handle his business, and he's going to, you know, get better this year as well. So, I believe they can and should.
Same page. From Tommy Guns, how many Notre Dame players are you projecting to be IB first-team All-Americans?
I haven't put that list together yet, but honestly, it's going to be the guys that we talked about earlier in the show, Tommy. Like, you know, Tommy doesn't mean this, but like sometimes questions like this, my gut reaction is like, are you saying that we overhype Notre Dame players when we do our own list? Like, no, I don't think Tommy means that. But like our All-American list is going to be who we think are the best players. And the guys that we think are best players, I think have an opportunity to be national All-Americans. So it'd be the list that we went over earlier, Tommy, and, you know, CJ Carr, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert on offense. And then it was Leonard Moore, Boubacar Traore, Drake Bowen, Kingsville Yamasa, Tay Johnson, and Adon Schuler on defense. I think those 9 of those 9. And again, when we did our breakdown, we're not predicting that all 9 are going to be first or second team All-Americans. It's possible. They're good enough, but it's not what I'm predicting. It's like if they're going to have All-Americans, we think it'll be from this group of players.
Yeah.
Whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. But it'll be from most likely from that group of players. Now, there's other guys. We didn't mention Bryce Young in that conversation. We could have easily mentioned Bryce Young in that conversation. You know, so there's other guys, but there's no way I'm predicting Bryce Young to be an All-American player this year because he hasn't come close to playing like it. But would you be shocked if he had to break out, Trev? If he became like a second-team All-American? I wouldn't be shocked, but It's a long way to go from where he is now to being a second-team All-American with how deep the defensive end position is this year nationally. So we try to be more realistic with like guys that are already kind of at least in the conversation based on production and talent and things along those lines. But there's some other guys who could certainly jump into that mix. But like that's a long way off. I mean, that's from where they've been to where they would need to be. I think the 9 we talked about, it's perfectly reasonable that those 9 guys are in the conversation. Meaning Adon, Anthony, Kingston, CJ, and Boubacar, I believe, have all been first, second, or third team All-Americans by somebody, I believe, this season. So, or this offseason. So it'd be that group of guys.
Yep. Another one from Tommy. Notre Dame will obviously have the most first-team All-Americans. What team will be second, and what other team might have a few more than you expected, even if the expectation is 0?
Well, I don't know that Notre Dame will obviously have that. I hope that you're correct. But, look, I think you're going to see if everybody lives up to their expectations this year. I think the two teams that I think could have a lot of All-Americans this year are Texas and Oregon. I think are two teams that, Oregon's got several defensive linemen that are going into the season with preseason expectations is that maybe that type of player, Amari Washington on the inside, and then obviously Mateo Uiagalelei on the outside. You've got, their two corners, Coy Parrish potentially at safety, offensively Dante, of course. Can one of their receivers break out and have a big year? Could Jeremy Johnson, a tight end, break out as he replaces Kenyon Sadiq and have a big year? Like, they're another team with a lot. Texas, I think Athlon had like 6 Texas players on their first-team All-America list, which is bonkers in their preseason magazine. Notre Dame only had 3 total. They had 6 in the first team. But, I mean, you look at it and you're like, okay, I don't think all 6 are going to be first team, but I didn't think any of the 6 were like, dude, what the heck is that guy doing on the first team list? So it was like, okay, there's some very heavy Texas love in this magazine, but none of them were dumb. It's like, come on, dude, you got that guy as a first-team All-American? Give me a break. No, I don't think any of those were absurd. It's like, I don't think – it's like that's the inside straight, though. Like, every potential first-team All-American ends up being a first-team All-American for Texas. But if Texas is the team that, wins the SEC, that could certainly happen. They're another one that could be in there in the conversation for me. Ohio State, maybe if Julian Sand repeats what he did last year and Jeremiah Smith is what he is and Bo Jackson has a breakout this year, Austin Saraveld's going to have some conversation there. You look in the secondary, there's some guys that could maybe get some love. Devin Sanchez is a first year as a full-time starter. Maybe he has a breakout. The safeties, obviously Jalen McClain, Terry Moore. So that's another team I think that could have a chance to have a high number 2. I'm not know that I'll predict Ohio State to have that many. I think this year could be one of the few, some is better than the individual parts outside of the elite pass catcher for Ohio State, or they're better than some people think. I have a buddy who swears they're going to go 8-4 this year. I'm like, dude, is Luke Fickell coming back? Because, I mean, unless Luke Fickell's coming back to be the head coach, I don't, they haven't lost 4 games since what, like 04? Something crazy like that?
Yeah, they haven't had under 10 wins since, I think, 04 or something.
Yeah, it's been except for the Fickell year, which was a weird year. But they're one. Indiana could potentially be one. Miami's one. I mean, Miami could have 4 or 5 on offense if things go well. Darren Mensah potentially, the 2 receivers. If Elijah Lofton is as good as some of Miami fans think, maybe one of their offensive linemen, Mark Fletcher, if he has a breakout year. I mean, defensively, I don't know if they have quite as many, but they have some couple secondary guys that could potentially be All-Americans this year. They're certainly getting enough preseason reputation. Maybe Damon Wilson becomes more than just a pass rusher and improves his all-around game like Boubacar did last year for Notre Dame. He could be a guy that maybe – so those are it's really the top 5 teams that we said are the 5 or 6 most talented, I think, are the teams that are most likely to compete for who's going to have the most All-Americans this year.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll be in contention for the most, but Alabama is a team that I have my eye on to potentially sneak some All-Americans in there as well. And I have not been shy around the fact that I do not have Alabama in my playoff projection. I don't.
Yep.
But they could be a team like Notre Dame from 23 or honestly Notre Dame in 25. I mean, Notre Dame had 2 unanimous All-Americans last year, didn't play for the playoffs. Different conversation for a different day. But, yeah, I mean, when I go and I look at Alabama's roster, like especially if Keelan Russell wins the starting quarterback job, I could see him being a freshman All-American. If Ryan Williams is able to bounce back, I could see that. And then, I mean, in their secondary alone, they have the opportunity to have maybe 2 between Xavier Brown and Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb. Dijon Lee is stepping into a big role this year. I mean,
the Pierre kid on the edge could be that kind of guy.
Yeah, Yanze Pierre could be one. Yeah, it's Alabama could have some this year. They're another team that I'm keeping my eye on.
Michael Carroll's a kid that maybe, is stepping in at right tackle, could maybe be a guy that has a breakout year. So, yeah, there's some guys. There's some guys there. They'd be that last part. I'm with you. That's actually a good one. I don't even have anybody else to pick. So, yeah, good one.
From Tyler Reese, despite Coach Marcus Freeman's September woes, on a scale of 1 to 10, what level of excitement do you have for Game 1 Shamrock Series versus Wisconsin? Personally, I'm at a 9.5.
10. I can't wait to see this team play. And then you get to see him play in an NFL stadium and, historic NFL stadium against, Marcus Freeman versus Luke Fickell, his former boss. The Shamrock uniforms, it's going to be blue versus red, and which I'm not sure how that's going to look. We'll see. But, man, I'm a 10 out of 10. I can't wait. I mean, and to Tyler's point, I want to see them exercise those September demons. I'm looking forward to seeing it. That's kind of like that last hurdle, to getting to the season is like, do they come out looking good or, is it going to be same old, same old?
Yeah, Tyler, I definitely get your question. Dude, they could be playing the University of Indianapolis and I would be at a 10. I am at the point of the offseason where I just want to see football. I do. Like they could be playing Rice in week 1 and I'd be at a level 10 for excitement. Like that. Look, yeah. I love the job that I do and I love the job that I have the opportunity to do. I'm still a Notre Dame fan. Like any excuse that I have to watch them play football, I'm always going to be a 10 out of 10. But with it being the Shamrock Series against the Big Ten opponent in Lambeau Field just makes it all the more exciting.
Yep. All right. Got one from Sine, Cosine, Tangent, our guy Tristan.
Both hit their full potential and maximize their ceiling. Who's the higher draft pick, Will Black or Gerby Lambert?
I'd lean towards Will Black because of the position. He's a left tackle. Now, could Gerby play left tackle? Yeah, I think he could, but he won't. I don't see a scenario where he does. Could he be Francis Malinois and kind of be a guy that people view as a potentially big-time right tackle, but some team falls in love with him in the top 10 as a guard, like the Giants apparently did? I think that's what I read, is that they took him at number 10 overall. 10 overall? Or was it 9 or 10 overall? But they're going to move him inside a guard, is what I read. And, Gerby showed that he could play guard, and he's long and big. But I think Gerby's probably the more he's longer than Will. His length is longer. He's more powerful than Will. Will's the better athlete, which is saying something because Gerby's a pretty good athlete. But Will Black athletically is elite. The question is, does he have the physicality and those type of things to be an elite player? But his athleticism is elite. And we saw that even in practices and small game appearances last year. That doesn't mean he's going to be a great player, but that left tackle piece is going to be good. Like, he's that one offensive lineman for Notre Dame. Like, I don't know that I've ever seen an offensive tackle Notre Dame run a sub 540. He could. Like, I would shock me if he does at some point in time, as long as he doesn't have injuries. So it'd be Will Black, left tackle, positional values, the end all be all for me when it comes to two guys. If they're both top 15 caliber prospects, one guy's a left tackle, one guy's a right, the left tackle is probably going to get drafted higher. But could be a scenario like, remember in 2009 where the Niners fell in love with Mike McGlinchey. They didn't need a left tackle. They needed a right tackle. They already had Trent Williams, the left tackles. They took McGlinchey at 9 because the right tackles are need. So there's always that potential scenario. But just with no context of who's drafting in the top 10, if they both came out at the same time, it would be Will Black because of the position he plays.
Yeah, just comparing these two, it's definitely Will Black because he's a left tackle, but some of it just depends on what is the other makeup of the draft class. And I'm not even just talking about offensive tackle. I mean, I take this draft class, for example. The outlook of the quarterback draft class is looking really exciting this year. Then you factor in Leonard Moore, and then you factor in Jeremiah Smith, and then you factor in Dylan Stewart, and then you factor in Colin Simmons. And then, so you never know. I mean,
big time quarterbacks, big time edge players, big time corners in this draft class. Like, that's premium positions right there, dude.
Mm-hmm. So it's if Gerby or Will come out in separate drafts, but one of them happens to go in a 2027 type of draft, they might go lower than the other one. Doesn't make them better than the other one.
Right. And then the next year, if he came out the next year, he might go in the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a good point. Really good point.
From Sine, Cosine, Tangent, who has a better hit stick, Adon or Drake?
Drake can do with 3 steps what Adon needs a running start to do because he's 30-plus pounds heavier and stronger. So, yeah, it's Drake. But Adon can smack you.
From Time Cone, does a healthy Christian Gray have a chance to be All-American at nickel in 26, or is that too difficult for a first year in that position?
No, he can. Certainly can. I mean, that's why we talked about him as being a guy that could potentially be that. Now, your submission came before we talked about him being a potential guy. Look, he has all the talent in the world to be that. But to your point, Time Cone, the fact that he's playing a new position and the fact that he has not shown he can avoid those bad games is why we're not predicting him to be an All-American, but I think he's certainly capable of it if he's healthy. I think that you nailed the part where he's healthy. He's got to be healthy and he's got to be focused. And that's going to be the big key. Like there's somebody in the chat was like, well, he does well against good receivers, but not great receivers. Number one, not many people do well against great receivers. That's why they're great receivers. Like what does that even mean? Number one. Number two, I'd say that's also false. But number three, it's that's allowed to be said because of Christian's lack of consistency. It's the believing this notion. Well, he only does well against certain teams because he's just that talented, but he does. No, it's not about that. Because even the Ohio State game, if you go watch that game and you watch the all 22 of that game, Christian was very good on that game except for 3 plays. There are a lot of plays where he is locking down Cardinal Tate and Jeremiah Smith. But it's that couple plays a game where you're like, oh, dude, what are you doing? You just did it right 5 times in a row. Why'd you do it wrong that time? That's what he's got to stop. You know, it's a play here, play there, except against USC. That's the one exception. They just beat him like a drum. I think it was in his head. He starts reaching and grabbing, and I think he went out after. I don't think he played the next couple weeks after that because he was legitimately injured, which you talked about all year. But he's got the talent to do so. But the inconsistency in the new position are why I'm not predicting he's going to do it. But I would not at all be shocked if he had that kind of season again. For all the crap some Notre Dame fans give him, he ranked 5th in college football last year in passes defense per game. 5th. It's not just us. I've seen draft analysts say he's one of the 10 best cornerbacks in the draft next year. It's not just me saying that.
No, he has all the physical tools to be top level corner. Got to stay healthy and be more consistent. I'm with you. From sine, cosine, tangent, who was the last defensive end freshman All-American that Notre Dame had?
I believe it was Aaron Lynch in 11. I don't think because Isaiah in his redshirt freshman year had like 4.5 sacks. I don't think Akwara. Julian be the only other one I could think of, and I don't even think he was that because I think he played as a true freshman. So let me just go look here real quick. I don't think Julian was a freshman All-American. No, he does not show here that he was a freshman All-American. So I think it's Aaron Lynch in 2011. So if somebody in the chat knows better, but I think Aaron Lynch in 2011. Am I missing somebody? Stephon was not that in 2012 because Stephon was a true sophomore in 2012. Who else could it have even been? Wasn't? Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's Aaron Lynch. I don't even know who else it could have been.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't Foskey. So it's been a minute.
Aaron Lynch would be that was what my mind immediately went to.
Smart man.
I have my moments. From DJ, what game do you think we first see Rodney Dunham in meaningful snaps?
Wisconsin. I think Rodney Dunham is in the rotation day one. I do. I mean, just based on what we saw in the spring, Trev, if he just does what he did in the spring, I think he plays. I definitely think.
He's there. It will not take him long to get into the starting lineup, or not starting lineup, into the meaningful snaps. Agreed. From Time Cone, against BYU, will Notre Dame run the ball more than passing in terms of play count? I'm imagining this game looks like USC approaching 2025.
Well, no, I have no idea. I'll say this. The 2025 USC game looked the way that it did because of USC's defensive game plan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Notre Dame went into that game saying, hey, we're just going to run it down their throat. I think Notre Dame always looks to run the ball, but I think Notre Dame was caught off guard in a good way that USC was doing what they were doing schematically and then went after it like right away and said, okay, they're doing this for some odd reason, so let's just take advantage. It wasn't that like, hey, this team's not good and let's run on them. It was USC said, hey, we're not going to let CJ Carr beat us. Okay. All right. I mean, did you watch the game against Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price last year against your team? But it was the dumbest thing. I mean, those guys, Jeremiah gets hurt on the first drive of the third quarter, ends the game with like, what was it, like 91 yards?
Like 99 yards or something.
Right? Yeah, I think you're right. 99 yards. Jadarian comes into the third quarter, replaces him, and Jadarian at the time had like -1 yards. I think he had 2 carries, like -1 yards in the first half, and he ends with over 100. And then not to mention that Jadarian ripped you up with a kick return for a touchdown the year before. Like, on what planet did you think that was a smart idea? And maybe that's why Danton Lynn's not at USC anymore. Even though I thought he did a lot of good things, but that was the dumbest game plan I've ever seen. They were like, we're going to sit back and cover, playing 2 high safeties and just, what are you doing? Like, that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I don't think BYU is going to be that stupid.
No,
I don't. I think they're going to go with the desire to be balanced. Look, there's going to be a lot of games this year where Notre Dame throws for 300 yards and they run the ball more than they pass the ball from an attempt standpoint, because they're going to average 13 yards per attempt because they hit some big plays. Will that be BYU? I don't know. But I'm not going to be afraid of, as much as we praise their secondary, I'm not afraid of throwing at their secondary either. You know, like it's not like, oh man, I think Miami's got a great secondary. I'm not going to be afraid of throwing at that secondary, because you have to trust your guys enough to say, hey, okay, great. You got a great secondary. We have great pass catchers. We have a great quarterback. So we're still going to throw the ball. Now, I don't know that going out and saying we're going to go empty and throw the ball all day is a great strategy, but you're going to strive for balance in those games.
Agreed. From Black Irish 864, Brian, what is BYU's depth chart like? Injuries.
Trev, I would say this is one position where there's a lot of spots that I think this could be their potential downfall. If they lose LJ Martin, that's going to hurt them a lot more than if Miami loses Mark Fletcher, for example. Yep. They lose Bear Bachmeier, that's going to sting a little bit. They lose one of their tackles, that's going to sting a little bit. I don't know that their depth is as good as Notre Dame, as Miami, as some of those top teams. That's a separate. Now, it's not like there's some bums, and if they lose a guy that they're going to be terrible. It's just there's a bit of a drop-off between their first team and their second team at a lot of places. I think their linebackers, they got good depth at linebacker. But I think they're not a team that can survive a rash of injuries. Like, they couldn't do what Notre Dame did in 2024.
No.
No way.
For as much praise as we just gave Evan Johnson and Terrion Alexander, what comes behind them is not Evan Johnson. To your point about Notre Dame in 24, they wouldn't be able to replace Benjamin Morrison with Leonard Moore. They're just not built that way.
Yep. Agree.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, from what you've heard, how rough of an environment is Provo compared to some other big road games Notre Dame has played in?
Similar. I mean, it's not going to be as loud as Kyle Field. No, I mean, I don't worry about road environments. I just don't. Not with this team. I worry about the altitude and the team that's on the field, because Michigan Stadium or Spartan Stadium is a place that's known to be pretty loud. I watched those fans a year where they won 10 games file out of the stadium in the third quarter in 2017. You take it to a team, I don't care what the environment is. You take it to a team and you silence their crowd. It doesn't matter. Now, you come out and not play well, then the crowd becomes a factor. Look at Miami 2017. Like, Notre Dame went right down the field on that first drive, and they were in position to score, and the crowd wasn't very loud. Then they don't score, miss a potential touchdown pass. Then Miami goes down and has a drive, and then they throw a pick six. Next thing you know, it's 14-0, and that crowd was insane, and you couldn't do the things to shut them up. So it really comes down to how you play. But if Notre Dame start the game, I expect it to be loud and raucous and vibrating and all the things you expect from a big-time road game. But Notre Dame's handled. They look. This is a program that's played at Ohio Stadium. This is a program that's played at Kyle Field, and we were told last year how tough of a place Arkansas was to play. This is a program that recent years has played in the Coliseum. That's not something I worry about anymore with this Notre Dame program. It's, can they beat the team on the field? That's the question. The crowd is not why Notre Dame lost to Miami last year. It's them making mistakes and them not playing to their level and the conditioning because of the heat and all that other stuff that I don't excuse. It's not like, it's a justification. You should not have been in a position where it was hot for them too. And so, it was hot in Kyle Field the year before. You weren't prepared for the game. You got outplayed. You got outcoached. That's why you got beat. You didn't get beat because the crowd was loud. The crowd was loud because you got beat. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a believer that it's, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I don't know, but whatever comes first is the performance on the field. If Notre Dame would have came out against Miami last year, taking that first drive right down the field and scored a touchdown, guess what the Miami crowd's not doing? Being loud. Just like Notre Dame's crowd isn't loud when the opponent comes in and goes right down the field. I've shared this story about the 15 USC game. That before Deshaun Kaiser threw that bomb to Will Fuller, the crowd was very quiet because they just watched USC go right down the field and score a year after USC beat them by 5 touchdowns. So they're like, here we go again. And then it didn't get loud until that ball hit Will Fuller's hands and when he beat Adoree Jackson. Then the crowd got loud, and then it was loud the rest of the game. It wasn't loud when USC was going down the field and scoring. I don't remember the Notre Dame crowd being super loud. I mean, it was loud, but it wasn't super loud as Indiana was driving down the field after Riley Leonard's interception. Now, Xavier picks him off. Next play, 98-yard touchdown, and then the crowd went crazy. Like, they were loud, but it wasn't like, oh, my God, how's Indiana going to survive in the red zone after Riley's pick with how loud the crowd is? It's not really how it works. So it'll be a tough environment, mainly because BYU is a really tough team. And the altitude, that's more of what I'm concerned about. Trev, what say you?
Yeah, I'm somewhere in between. I don't think crowd noise is a non-factor, but I also don't think it will dictate the outcome of the game either. Like I think the analogy of like the chicken or the egg is perfect for this scenario. Like I've talked to some people that it's like crowd noise literally doesn't matter, and it's like, well, I also disagree. Like it makes communication on the field significantly tougher. You want to talk about being able to execute on the field. It's significantly easier when you're able to hear the other person and what calls are being put in. But it doesn't ultimately affect it whether you put points on the board.
But would you agree that in today's era, it's not as hard? Because of number one, everyone signals now. Number two, you do have the helmet communication that allows you to communicate to the quarterback as well. Like because teams do so much more shotgun now, and they don't huddle as much, I think signals are so important. It's like teams are kind of already prepared for volume. More so. Now, I'm not saying it's not a factor. I'm just saying it's not going to be it doesn't impact the outcome of the game. I think that's one of the most overstated things in football when you're talking about the best teams.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's a factor for some team that's like, Ball State goes into Notre Dame Stadium, there might be like, oh my gosh, but that Bama's not doing that. You know what I mean? Ohio State's not worried about that. Just like Notre Dame wasn't worried about that when they played Ohio State. They took the first drive right down the field and got a field goal. Should have scored a touchdown, but that's my thing. It's just teams are better prepared for that now in this era of signaling and this era of the, having the communication in your helmet. But suck early in the first half, and then all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh. Yeah, for me, I'm sitting there in Kyle Field, and I'm literally shaking in the press box. Not because I'm nervous, because the press box is shaking as Notre Dame marches right down the field and scores a touchdown. You know what I mean? Like, it becomes a factor when you let it become a factor with your performance. That's how I feel about it, but I could be wrong. Wouldn't be the first time, Trevor.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, this may sound like a dumb question, but how do you find talent as a head coach of a blue blood program? How do you scout 16 to 17-year-olds with elite talent? It's a huge country.
I mean, that's a long conversation, Jay Melvin, but there's a lot of things. Number one is you do use scouting services, not Rivals and On3. There's actual scouting services that give you names. There are camps that you'll respond to when you go on the road, when coaches go on the road and you're like, why are they stopping at this school? They don't have a kid. Well, it's because they're looking at the sophomore. They're talking to the coach. They may know a coach and say, coach, man, who are the kids I should be talking to in this area? Hey, man, coach, for you, this is who you should talk to. They watch game film. They have scouting departments. Those are all things that factor into those conversations. Kids that they've brought into their camp, the Irish Invasion camp, the team camps, the kicking camps, there's so many ways to find talent. And then sometimes you'll find a kid because a kid reached out to you. Hey, coach, I'd love to look at Notre Dame. Here's my film. And they're like, okay, kid, whatever. We get thousands and thousands of film. And you pop the film in. You're like, holy moly, this kid can actually play. There's a lot of different ways to get to that.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, in your opinion, who's the better line coach, Bob Bostad or Alex Maribel?
I think Bob Bostad's the best offensive line coach in college football. So I think Alex Maribel is an outstanding coach. I don't think there's anybody better than Bob Bostad right now.
Agreed. From Jay Melvin, Brian, how confident are you Notre Dame will be a top 5 to 10 offensive line? Is there any concern Notre Dame could fall out?
Out of the top 10, no. I don't have concern about them being out of the top 10. I think they were a borderline top 10 team last year without nearly the talent that they'll have this year. Borderline top 10. No, I that's not my concern. My concern is more of like they're in the top 10, but they're 8.
Yeah.
And they're just not as good as they should be.
They're
I'm more
really
concerned about
good,
that.
not championship caliber. That is
Right.
my concern.
Right. That's fair. Very fair. Yeah. I'm much more confident, Trev, that they're going to be in the top 10 than I am the top 5. The top 5 is projection. Like that's pure projection. Like they need to go out there and prove it.
Yeah.
It's just what they've done, the talent they have, the experience they have. I think it's going to be very good. I'm very confident saying that they'll be top 10. I'm not going to sit there and say I am confident they're going to finish number 2. Part of the reason I have number 2 is because I have similar concerns about Texas. I have similar concerns about Tennessee and Iowa and Ohio State and a lot of teams. It's just I think Notre Dame's talent's better. That's really what it comes down to for me. But top 10, very confident. Top 5, confident. It's what they should be. It's more of what they should do as opposed to what I know confidently they will do.
Yep.
Joe Rudolph has to prove to us he can build a top 5 offensive line. He's not done so. You could debate. We could argue whether he's done a top 10 or not. I don't think someone who wants to argue Notre Dame's had a top 10 line the last 2 years is nuts. I don't know that I would necessarily agree. I'd have to sit down and think about it, but I wouldn't sit there and be like, dude, you're out of your mind. Top 5 is a different animal.
Yeah, I think Joe Rudolph in 2024 did a top 10 job, but I don't know if I would argue that Notre Dame's offensive line was a top 10 offensive line.
The coaching piece maybe, but then I would say the personnel decisions is what dings him for me. You shouldn't have needed injuries to get the right line on the field. That's always going to be my concern with Joe Rudolph. And that's partly why I'm excited about this team is because they made those decisions before the season, not during the season.
Sure.
And that's something that has me excited. Like just something as dumb as like, why would you put Sam Pendleton next to Anthony Knapp for a whole month? That makes no sense to me. Why would you not want to have Billy Schrouth, a veteran, next to Anthony Knapp? Like just things like that made no sense to me.
Is the SMU O-line coach pretty good from Casey, MCC?
Yeah. Guy named Garen Justice. I think he's one of their co-coordinators. Let me look that up here real quick. Let me see this real quick. So Garen Justice, SMU. Yes, he's co-offensive coordinator, assistant head coach. He's been with them since 2001. I like what they do on the offensive line. I mean, he was their offensive line coach when they went to the playoff. He was their offensive line coach last year. I think he's a good offensive line coach. Good recruiter and developer. He's a good coach.
From Brandon Plensner, I think if IU suffers any injuries on that offensive line, they could go from potentially a number 1 O-line to comfortably outside the top 10. They seem to be lacking some serious depth.
That's one of the dangers when you're a portal team like Indiana, where you're constantly plugging holes in the portal. I think that's a very fair criticism. They have decent depth, like solid depth, but I do not see the same depth. Like Notre Dame could lose Gerby Lambert and that would suck and you're losing All-American, but it's like Matty Augustine could still be pretty good, or Sullivan Absher and Matty Augustine could still be pretty good. Or, you lose to Ashton Craig, you're going to a Joe Otting. I don't think they're as prepared for that as Notre Dame is, as Texas is, some teams like that. I think that's one of the dangers of recruiting the offensive line through the portal.
Sure.
The way that they have. Like now, the thing is, some of their better players, I think Bray Lynch is an Indiana recruit. Carter Smith was an Indiana recruit. They weren't portal guys, but the point is when they lose those guys, they're replacing them with portal guys. Or if they were weak at a spot when he showed up, they went and got a portal guy, and they're still replacing with the portal guy. Now they're trying to recruit high school football better, but it's still a work in progress. It's still Indiana, and so that's fair. Would you say that's fair, Trev?
Yeah, I would. I mean, the tough part about this conversation is like that's not just specific to IU, in my opinion. Like I know a lot of people that think that Ohio State has at one of the top 3 receiving rooms in the country. But like if Jeremiah Smith gets hurt and then, Brandon Innes gets hurt, and it's like you could argue they could be outside of the top 10 potentially. So it's like I definitely valid for IU's offensive line, but it's like that for quite a few teams. There's very few teams that match the depth of like what Notre Dame has or what Ohio State has at certain spots or what Oregon or Texas have at certain spots. That's why we think they have some of the best rosters in the country.
Mm-hmm. Here's one, Trev. I'll get your thoughts on this. From Andre Tonsel. He says, if BYU goes 11-1 and then losses to Notre Dame, who will be the key to that success, position group wise, referring to BYU? Meaning if they live up to their potential, they're 11-1 team going into the Big 12 title game. I would say, barring a not getting blown out away from being in the playoff, kind of like SMU was 2 years ago, what position group would be the driver of that?
I think their defensive line. They have the most question marks to me on the entire team. Like, legitimately, I mean, Bear Bachmeier just repeats what he did last year. I mean, he went 12-2 as a true freshman, first time starting.
Threw for 3,000 yards. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if he's just that guy, I mean, I think BYU once again goes 11-1 in the regular season like they did this past year. Their defensive line is where I have major questions because there's nobody that I can point to, unlike their linebacking core, where we can say Isaiah Glasgow needs to step up, or Kedu Luave, who transferred in from Cal and needs to play a big role. I just don't know who that guy is on the defensive line. If they play better than how I'm projecting them to be, the defensive line is going to play a huge role in their success.
I love that. Instead of going like with the known strengths, the quarterback, the backfield, the O-line, the secondary, it's like, okay, what's the thing that could hold them back? And if they're going to live up to their potential, it's, of course, the O-line plays well, the secondary plays well. It's that group that raises their level of play. That's the thing that sets. That's a great answer, Trevor. Love that one. Let's go with another one. Let's see if Trev can go on a roll here. Jay Melvin says, are you more confident that BYU could win the Big 12 this year over Texas Tech than last year?
Am I more confident in BYU that can win more than last year? Yes, but it's not with a lot of confidence. Some of the reasons why is Bear Bachmeier is a year older now. BYU has now also faced this much more skilled, talented version of Texas Tech already. Now, they've done it twice. And one of the things that I said previewing the Big 12 championship game is like, well, they've already seen it once. So, let's see how they do the second time around. And they lost by a bigger
and it got worse
than they played. But when I look at BYU this year, you're giving Kalani Sitake an entire offseason to prepare and level up for it. Not just the skilled talent at Texas Tech, but the skilled talent at Notre Dame, the skilled talent at Arizona State. And I think that's going to pay some dividends. Skilled talent at Utah with Devin Dampier coming back. So, BYU is not one of those teams where it's like, yeah, we'll just lose to Notre Dame and then we'll try to run the table in conference. Like, their goal is to also try to beat Notre Dame. They were 12-2 last year. And so I have more confidence that BYU could win the conference this year in comparison to where they were last year. But from top to bottom, despite all the Brendan Sorsby stuff, Texas Tech still has probably the best roster in the conference.
So I think if we're just looking at it from BYU to Texas Tech, I'd say yes. I'm more confident they can beat Texas Tech this year because I think BYU is better and Texas Tech is not quite as good. But I still think Texas Tech is still the better team because the gap was pretty wide. I think the reason that I'm not as confident that they're going to win the Big 12 this year is not even really about Texas Tech. I think the Big 12 is going to just be better at the top.
Sure.
I think that Arizona State's going to have a bounce back year. We've talked about that. I think Arizona should still be a good team this year. I think TCU will still be a solid team this year. I think Kansas State's got a shot to be a little bit better this year. Oklahoma State's going to be more competitive this year than they were last year. I'm not sure I'm buying into like they're a playoff team like some people project. It's not out of the realm of possibility in this league. But I just think the league overall is just going to be better at the top this year. It's this deeper league where it was like Texas Tech and then everybody else. Well, I mean, Arizona State showed last year that when they were focused and not banged up, they could beat Texas Tech, so I think it's more of, I just think it's just not the Big 12 title goes through Lubbock.
Yeah.
But on your way to Lubbock, you also got to go through Tempe and you've got to go through Tucson and you've got to go through maybe even Waco with DJ Lagway there. You may have to go through Manhattan, Kansas. You may have to go
Houston,
Lawrence, Kansas. Houston, I don't know why. I do not give them enough respect this year, Trev, in that when I think of the Big 12, I don't think of Houston. But you are flat out correct. Like, that's another one. I mean, it's going to be a really competitive league this year, and it usually is. But it's usually competitive in, like, there's a bunch of just solid teams. I think there's 3 or 4, like, potentially really good teams. Teams that could get to the playoff and maybe win a game in the first round. So that's kind of how I view the Big 12 this year. And I think that's the bigger concern for BYU than just Texas Tech. They can end up being better than Texas Tech and still not win the Big 12 because Arizona State does, or Houston does, or Arizona does with Noah Fafiti. I mean, it feels like he's been in college freaking forever at this point in time. Like, didn't this guy go against Jimmy Clausen one year? I swear, it's like he's been in college forever. But there's just more of those teams this year. If Colin Klein can get Avery Johnson to play like we know Avery Johnson is capable of, maybe they're a team to keep an eye on. So that's what I think is going to be so fun about the Big 12 this year. And that could make it tough. I mean, Utah, what are they going to be? I have no idea with the new coach and things like that. So it's going to make it interesting.
From Tyler Reese, BYU's Bruce Mitchell or Notre Dame's Ashton Craig, who you taking?
Well, okay, there's two answers. One is I'm always taking the Notre Dame kid because I want to take the kid that wanted to be at Notre Dame. But now if you're saying who do I want to take at Notre Dame, that would be my answer. Now, if you're going to say, okay, I'm putting together a preseason All-America team and I have to choose between the two, who am I taking? I would take Bruce Mitchell. And the reason why I would take Bruce Mitchell is because I have greater confidence that Bruce Mitchell can be out there every week. I'll say it again. If Ashton Craig can stay healthy, if he can get back to full strength and stay healthy, Ashton Craig has a chance to be one of the 2 or 3 best centers in all college football this year. But Bruce Mitchell started more games last year than Ashton Craig started in 3 years because of injuries. So if you were to tell me, hey, they both are full healthy, they're both full strength, full health, and they both play a full year, who will be better? I think Ashton Craig will be better. But if I'm doing a preseason prediction type of thing, which I'm taking a little bit of liberties with your question, Tyler, because you didn't say that, but that's how I'm looking at it. Then I'd take Bruce Mitchell. He's the more certain play. He's the greater certainty. How about this? Higher floor versus higher ceiling. Higher floor, Bruce Mitchell. Higher ceiling, Ashton Craig.
We are the exact same page. From Jay Melvin, Brian, I went back last night and rewatched the blue and gold game. My takeaway was this team on the offensive and defensive line looks extremely massive.
Yeah,
they
are. They are very big.
Seeing them in person also backs up that sentiment, Jay Melvin.
Well, even a guy like Francis Brew, who's only 6'1", 285. But then you see him in person and you're like, dude's got like massive arms because he's just incredibly strong. And then you see like Tion Gray and, like Jason Onya used to be like him and Riley Mills were like the big guys in the D line. They were 6'5", 305. And now you're like, they're 6'5", 305 and Tion's 6'5", 330. And Sean Sevillano 6'1", 330. Davion Dixon. It's just like, your ends are trees.
And what's crazy
is Bubakar's the short guy.
Well, and what's crazy is they're just getting bigger. Mm-hmm. Like, look at the 26 class. especially in the offensive line, man. We're talking about, Ashton Craig's pretty big center, like 6'5", 6'4", 310. Joe Otting's like 6'4", 305. Sullivan Garvin is already the biggest center on the roster. He's been there for 4 months. It's just crazy.
Yep.
From Titus, any surprise players will return in 27?
Yeah, it's very early to say, but I don't want to disrespect your question. Be like, man, come back and talk to me in 5 months. I just thinking how the season might go. CJ Carr could be a surprise return in 2027. He may look at it and say, hey, I'm probably a first-round pick, but do I want to be Bo Nix at 12 or 10 or 12 and be the 4th quarterback taken, or do I want to come back and it's me and Julian Sane going against number 1 in 2028? Now, that's not always a given because there's going to be some guys like Keelan Russell and Malik Washington and guys like that. But, like, you feel like look at it that way. It just depends. Number one, it depends on how well he plays and how well Notre Dame plays. And then is he viewed as the number 1 quarterback in the draft class, number 2, or is he number 4 or 5? Because number 4 or 5 may still get you a top 10. But if you come back next year and you're going to have a bunch of your receivers back, bunch of your offensive linemen back, defense should still be pretty good, and maybe you put up even more numbers and rewrite Notre Dame record books. And, you win that title you couldn't win in 26, and now you're the number 1 pick as opposed to number 10 or number 12. There's a lot that goes into that. And that's more likely now in this era of NIL because you can pay him $3-4 million to come back. That's not as much as he'll make as a top 10 to 15 draft pick, but it's enough to make him feel comfortable coming back and trying to move up next year. So he'd be one. As far as a surprise, I don't think either of the safeties come back. Leonard Moore's not coming back. Drake's not coming back. Kingston's another one. I think a lot of people just assume he's going to leave. I don't assume he's going to leave. He'd be another one that I'd say might surprise some people by coming back in 2027. What say you, Mr. Trowbridge?
Leonard Moore. You heard it here first.
Trevor does not actually believe that, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I do not. No, surprise returner. I mean, there is a world where Boubacar comes back. I mean, I'm not predicting it, but like for similar reasons that you talked about with CJ, it's like, I mean, this draft class for ends is going to be loaded.
Right.
Absolutely loaded. I mean, maybe there's a world where Boubacar comes back in 2027. Not predicting it, but it would be a surprise.
It would be a surprise, yeah. And it's not a stupid surprise. It's not like Leonard Moore. If you were serious about that, right? Like, like because you weren't. But yeah, like it's shock me if Drake Bowen came back. Not surprised. Yeah. Shock me.
Yep.
Shock me if Leonard Moore came back. Borderline would shock me if Adon Schuler and Tay Johnson come back, especially Tay Johnson, Bronte Johnson.
Yeah.
Boubacar would surprise me. Wouldn't shock me. CJ wouldn't shock me, but it surprised me. So yeah, that'd be one. Good question. Good question, Titus. Well, that'll do it, Trev.
Folks, another really fun show here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. I believe Vince and I will be back tomorrow for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. We're really cranking out stuff with this IB magazine coming out. Brian's taking a writing day on Friday. So Vince and I will be here for the Friday free-for-all mailbag.
You're taking a writing day on Monday, so it'll be me and Vince for Buy So Hold. So what's so great about one of the many reasons it's great to have Vince around for the summer shows is that we can catch our breath a little bit. So
yeah.
The feedback I got from the show you guys did this week is that you guys did a great job, which made me feel even more confident taking a couple days off this week to get caught up on the magazine. So great job, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Outside of his movie opinions, Vince has been great to do shows with.
I honestly, literally, I called Stiers, I called my dad, I called you. I literally thought about firing Vince when I found out that he doesn't like Rocky. I had to get talked off the ledge a little bit. I didn't actually feel that way, but I was shocked. I was like, what? Because like I showed him the preview for that I Play Rocky movie, which I think looks awesome. I'm so excited to see that. And Vince is like, I'm not a Rocky guy. I was like, what? Shattered my world, Trev. Shattered my world. I didn't know that you guys had that conversation on Monday in the Buy Sell Hold.
Yeah, he just kind of casually brought it up. It was like Buy Sell Hold, like non-patriotic, patriotic movies. And he's like, this one's easy for me. He's selling Rocky 4. And I was just like, at first I thought he was going to come at it from the angle of like, it was like kind of done up and like the punches sounded like nuclear bombs. And it's like, okay, like fair enough. That's not a traditional boxing movie. Then he was like, I just don't like Rocky. And I was like, okay, well, I don't like you. So
yeah, I mean, I questioned our friendship. I questioned his employment at Irish Breakdown. I questioned I mean, are you a communist? Like, do I need to get Joe McCarthy after you or something like that? Like, what is going on right now?
Like, okay.
Like what's funny is I guess he told Stars he doesn't like boxing. I'm like, there's so little boxing in Rocky. Like, that's the thing about the Rocky movies is there's actually not a lot of boxing. I think the only one where there was like multiple fights was Rocky 3, which I think was the worst of the original 4 because he fought Clubber Lang twice in that one. Yeah. But like the first one, they don't fight till the end. I mean, there's like the little Spider Rico fight at the beginning. And then the second one, like there's very little boxing in the second one until the end. I mean, he spends more time in the hospital in Rocky 2 than he does in the boxing ring. But yeah, I questioned everything. I mean,
to each their own.
Yeah.
And to think I drove to and from Jackson, Michigan in one day to
don't ask Trev to come to your golfing outing next year, Vince. It's a no bueno. And he's like, okay, I'll come if you watch all 4 Rockies.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree with Chris, Black Irish. It's un-American to not like Rocky. I completely agree.
Yeah, I also agree. And never mind. A different story for a different day. But folks, on your way out of the show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do.
The best part is Vince is in the show listening to all of this. That's the best part about it. He's in the show. He's in the back end listening to all of this.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Oh, folks, best way to stay in tune with what we got going on here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. Off screen is the Rocky Hater. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.